Welcome to Fruiting Body Podcast with your host, Brendan O'Neill. Today we have an amazing guest here. This is Dr. Thomas Lodi. He's been living in Phuket on and off for 10 years or so, but truly you've been here for the past 4 years. He is one of the leading oncologists with an integrative approach. I'm not going to go into the details of what that is in terms of holistically, but we will dive into that with him when we start. Let's go. So we're going to be starting with Dr. Thomas Lodi, the leading oncologist, not only in Thailand, but also in the US. And we're going to be discussing his integrative approach to cancer treatment. Just before, we got a lot of viewers watching this. I know this is cliche, but smash that subscribe, give this a like if you enjoy it, and let's get this started. Okay, Dr. Thomas Lodi, thank you for joining us today. Usually, the way that we start the Fruiting Body podcast is we like to explain the journey of the guest coming from their home country to Phuket, what they're doing here and where they're going. But I think with yourself, we're going to have a lot of interesting topics to discuss. So let's make a long story short and just quickly explain a little bit about your background and what you do and how you got to Phuket.
Okay. So my background, I'm a medical doctor. Before I was a medical doctor, I was a psychologist, clinical psychologist. And before that, I lived in India for a couple of years and, studied different spiritual practices. Anyway, so I went into, did medical training, formal medical training, and did my, this is relevant to what you were saying before when you introduced me. I did my residency in internal medicine, and then I began my fellowship in oncology, and within a few months I quit because I couldn't watch what we did to people. I couldn't watch people. I'd see someone walk in the door, and
this is during your education.
After medical school.
You
go into internship and residency. Yeah. When you complete your residency, which makes you a specialist in something, right? So mine was internal medicine, which is the most foundational, detailed. And then there's a subspecialty of internal medicine, cardiology, nephrology, oncology. There's many of them, right? They're all subspecialties. So I was going to do the subspecialty of oncology, but I couldn't hurt people the way we were hurting them. So I left it. And I just kept my credentials as an internal medicine doc and ICU doc. I did a lot of ICU work. After about 10 years, I quit, became and went around the world, studied.
And one second, let's just push this in a bit. I think it needs to come down, up, and about there. That's perfect.
Yeah. Then I went around the world and studied all different non-conventional protocols and ways of thinking and all that. And then I finally wound up back in New York around the year 2000 and started doing this. So. And then I went to Arizona and started An Oasis of Healing, which is still around. It's been there 17 years now. It's one of the first integrative oncology centers in the world. So I came here 9 or 10 years ago for two reasons. One is I love Thailand, and number two is I hate America. So you put those together, it works out pretty nice.
It's an easy decision.
Yeah. So anyway, but more than that, I just realized that when I had been in India, I knew that I went to India because I didn't like the Western world. There were none of the roles in the Western world that I wanted to emulate. And so I came back to America just to learn a trade, and then I was going to get out. It took me 45 years to get out.
But when you were going, so I also read you went to Japan as well. You went to India. Was this your attempt to learn? Would the terminology besides integrative approach be like a holistic healing? And I think that term is, especially to the general public, until I've done my research, it gets a very hippy-dippy connotation attached to it. But the reality of it itself, it's essentially you're taking all would you say like facets of healing and applying them into a single concept, such as Ayurveda you're using, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
the question was your intention to go to India just to kind of take a break and escape, or to try to find different approaches to healing?
No, when I first went to India, I was 19, so
Okay.
it was before I dropped out of college. I was at UCLA. I dropped out of college, went to India, one-way ticket. I wanted to be a monk, live on an ashram. I had no intention of coming back. I wound up back, and then went into psychology, etc. But after practicing medicine for 10 years, and I quit, and then I went around the world. I went to Japan, Mexico, Europe, and all over the U.S., and I studied and apprenticed with people. And what I was doing was looking at what I would call traditional medicine. What they practice today is is conventional medicine. It's not traditional. Traditional is Chief Rolling Thunder. Traditional is traditional Chinese medicine. By tradition means generations and generations. This current mode of practice didn't come about until there was a guy named Abraham Flexner who was hired by the Rockefellers to produce a report in 1910, 1911 called the Flexner Report, which forever changed medical education. So this whole allopathic model of drugs, cutting, and radiation started then, and they know, if you educate, if you want to, like, you don't have to go in and have a physical war with the country. You just need to go in and educate their youth.
What was the agenda or the motive for them to change from traditional medicines into this allopathic type of school of thought?
Well, because the allopathic is it's based on a paradigm of the disease paradigm. It's all money and control. Okay, so it's a disease paradigm, right? So the disease paradigm says that there are these entities called diseases that will get into you, and you got to get rid of them. So it's very much like jungle medicine. You know, you got possessed, you got to go to the shaman, they give you the magic potion, and you get better, right? Instead of what we knew before that, because there were some of the greatest physicians ever between 1850 and 1920, and then there were some other great ones too, but that I studied. I've read all of them. But anyway, and to understand that what we call disease is the body adapting to a situation where our biological needs are not being met. So if we're not eating human food, if we're eating processed food with high carbohydrates and all that, our the fluid around our cells is going to be full of glucose, and our cells have the wisdom of God, the wisdom of nature, however you want to look at it, and to protect themselves, because glucose will kill them, they become insulin resistant. That's what they do. That's a protective, adaptive response. We call that a disease. We say he's got diabetes.
When this all came together, like, again, we're talking 1910, was this like a conglomerate of the medical industry, of the medical industry itself, and possibly like the salt and sugar industries? Did they all come together to work together, or did that kind of just happen by magic?
You know, it was the Rockefellers, and basically it was a way to, they have a grand plan. They had a grand plan when it's about, and you got to realize he was funded years ago. He was funded by
Napoleon days, no?
He was funded by the Rothschilds.
Which
Rothschilds was in the Napoleon days. Rockefellers kicked in around 1880s. Yeah. Okay, but he was 1860, whatever it was. John D. Rockefeller. But they were funded by. So was Morgan. You know, they were all funded by the Rothschilds. But anyway, the idea was control. And anyway, and what they realized right around that time was that they could produce drugs that were made out of petroleum. And he had oil, Rockefeller Standard Oil. He had oil, and that oil. So it was a way to produce money. So instead of understanding that people their bodies adapt, and these adaptations make them less functional, and that the only thing they need to do is get back to living a healthy life and living, getting fresh air, getting sleep, getting, all the things, eating real food, all that stuff, and their body no longer needs to adapt, and they're restored to health. So instead of having that paradigm reign supreme, they had a paradigm where you have millions of diseases, you therefore have millions of causes, and you therefore have millions of treatments, and all of these treatments will be sold. So it turned into It was a business. So that's the allopathic business.
Was this a complete paradigm shift? Would that be a milestone when everything changed around 1910? And the question is, like, prior to that, what was the typical school of thought for, curing a disease or making people, if you had an illness, what was the treatment?
Well, probably there were several schools: homeopathy, naturopathy, and homeopathy, naturopathy, and then other than that, just traditional botanical medicines. And stuff like
Ayurveda,
Chinese. Well, Ayurveda was India.
Okay, so
Right,
you're talking more on the Western world.
Western world.
Western world,
right?
Yeah.
But homeopathy and naturopathy and chiropractics was a big deal. And they were split. It was probably a 4-way split with allopathy there. The allopaths were the druggists. They were the druggist, the apothecary, and they were in there making their drugs, right?
But at this point, it's still natural medicine. I mean, there weren't a lot of
There weren't
chemicals.
synthetics.
There were no synthetics to work with back
Right.
then.
So they were using opiates and they were using cocaine.
Yeah.
They were using things like that in those days, and they put it in everything because you'll feel better no matter what.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about opiates is that you can go into some of the ancient, not the ancient, but back in those days, and probably even today, you go into the opium dens where you'll find a 110-year-old guy sitting there on opium. It's protective. Now, he doesn't remember the last 90 years, so what's the use of living? But the point is, it is physiologically protective. So they would put it in everything. And then also cocaine too. Sigmund Freud, who was very well known, was a cocaine addict. In fact, he injected it. And so, in those days, it was those kinds of drugs.
But those drugs, were they solving the problem, or were they kind of just still a Band-Aid to the
Allopathic.
Yeah.
Allopathy just puts a
Band-Aid
on
on the wound. Yeah.
Yeah. The way a good metaphor is that you're driving in your car and you're out, you've left the city and you're driving in your car, and all of a sudden a red light comes blinking on, right? So you reach in your glove compartment, you grab a hammer, you smash the light, and you go back to driving. Right? So you got rid of the light. What happens down the road? Now down the road, you're going to have a problem you can't fix. And that's what allopathy is all about. Allopathy is blocking the symptom, and the symptom is a signal by your body to you to stop or check this out. Pain means it's real clear. Stop.
Yeah.
Pain is real clear. So anyway, so they've disconnected us from it. But also understand something about the world. In 1910, also 1911 was the Jekyll Island affair.
Okay.
And I don't know if people are aware of that.
No, I'm not aware of
that. You can read a book called Creature of Jekyll Island, and that's where Morgan, Rockefeller, and a whole group of people met.
This is the island. It's off like kind of northeastern.
North Carolina, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And they met and they came up with, because what they had tried to do was to bring a central bank into the U.S. Since Washington. I mean, they tried. They came and went. Abraham Lincoln tried to go against it, right? So anyway, so in 1910, or at the Jekyll Island meeting, they concluded that, okay, well, look, we can no longer tell them what we're doing, so let's call it federal. And so they came up with the Federal Reserve Act. They brought Woodrow Wilson out of. They wanted to bring Woodrow Wilson in because they knew he would sign it into law. So they brought Teddy Roosevelt out of retirement to run as a third party to split it so that that Woodrow Wilson would get in because they knew it would be close, and indeed they were correct. And that was it. So that's what happened. And then from then on, everything was easy because now you have a central bank. Now you can control the cash. And that was it. If anyone would like to really get a good understanding of this, there's a documentary you can find online called Money Masters.
Yep.
Excellent. Have you ever seen it?
No, I haven't. But I've been down those rabbit holes on many different types.
Very good. It's very good.
And I think, like, for any of our listeners out there, these terms have been tossed around, from my experience, at least the past 10 years, and you get called a conspiracy theorist and a lunatic and a kook. I mean, you can share these, if you try to share these stories, and I'm 100% on your side because I've read them and I understand them. But when you try to bring these stories back to the US or Canada, my relatives or parents or friends, they give you kind of a stern look, like, what the hell are you talking about?
Are you old enough to remember phone books?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So you remember in phone books, you'd have in the front part they'd have the white section that was governmental agencies, right?
Yeah, the white pages.
Yeah. And then they would have retail sales. The Federal Reserve was not in the government. It came in right after Federal Express. It was a retail. It's a private consortium. It's not a governmental agency. So I mean, it's not a conspiracy. It's just the way it is. It's a private consortium of bankers. And who are those bankers? Now imagine the Constitution in the U.S. said that only Congress will have the right to print money. So that's what this did. It took that away. It subverted that entire idea. So now the Congress, I guess, prints the money, gives it to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve then loans it to the banks, and they give it what's called the prime interest. So they control the money flow. But it's a private consortium. That's the whole thing.
And it still is the Federal Reserve. Is it
still exists.
It's privatized.
It was always private. But the point is, part of this control was the control of medicine. So anyway, going back to your original thing, so what I call integrative medicine is because I've studied a lot. I've studied Ayurvedic. I've studied the traditional Chinese, Naturopathy, botanical medicines. I studied with some of the great current. Now they passed away, but I mean they were current at the time I was working with them. And put it all together. And when I went back, so integrative means I took the best of every healing modality that I could study, and I brought it together to a set of protocols and paradigm. And that's what I did. And what I found was that nowhere, and still to this day, nowhere are they doing all of it, which means if you don't change your body's internal biochemistry, and there's no other way to heal. That's the only way you'll heal. If you're only going to look at doing some sort of intravenous therapy, some interventional therapy, see that even if you're doing that with vitamin C, let's say you're using vitamin C, curcumin, you're using all botanicals, no drugs, but that's all you're doing, you're still allopathically minded. They call them green allopaths because they're giving. So instead of walking out of the doctor's office with 12 prescriptions, you walk out with 12 supplements. Right? This will fix you. This is all you need. It's just this. Let me give you some let me fix you. That whole concept is allopathy. You're not going to fix him or me or it because they're not broken. Their body's doing exactly what it should do.
So are you one of the only ones doing this holistic integrative approach where you are touching upon all schools of thought of different types of medicine from around the world? Are there any other type of doctors?
No,
in
they're
the
doing
US, or?
a lot are doing that, but they're only doing the interventional aspect, giving the IVs and stuff like that. But I talk about we need to work on the body, and the attitude, the mind, and the spirit. It's a whole. You have to you have to see the human being as a psycho-spiritual physical being, right? For example, just to give you an idea of how powerful the mind's influence is on the body, let's say you have two young women, they're 28 years old, 30 years old, they become roommates. Within 2 months, they're menstruating at the same time. They didn't plan it, talk about it, it just happened. Mothers and daughters will often menstruate at the same time. Another example, a couple trying to have a baby. They can't get pregnant after many, many, many years, etc. They finally adopt. 2 months later, she's pregnant. Okay, so we don't understand. How come? Why is it that when you take a group of women who get raped and a group of women who are trying to get pregnant, you have a higher percentage of rape victims get? Who knows what? But in our psyche. So in other words, what I'm saying is that our psyche and our that connection to our health is profound and is completely overlooked by most. Why is it that women with left-sided breast cancer, not all of them, but most of them have pretty serious issues with their mother?
Is there a direct correlation between all of these examples as well? And
right, or with their child. And the right-sided breast cancer seem to have troubles with either their husband, their spouse, or their occupation. Not always. So in other words, there's psycho-spiritual components to all of our physical conditions that are not healthy.
Are we be able to be objective on those claims, like in the sense that Go back to two women that are roommates. They come together. They're menstruating. Are we able to figure out why that's happening, or is it just it's beyond our knowledge even?
No. Well, now we understand. Now we understand that the mind, right? We have to understand that the mind is different from the brain, right? If the mind is thinking and thoughts, the interaction between the mind, brain, and the body is through a place called the hypothalamus, right? And the hypothalamus then talks to the pituitary, which sends out and controls all the hormones, right? So fear or whatever was going on, or a camaraderie, a desire to be close to, like you have this new roommate, let's say they have some sort of admiration for each other or whatever it is, they just, it correlates. Their biochemistries come together. And we have to understand that. And in terms of energy, for example, if you've got, people need to equilibrate. So, for example, a child's outside, he's hurt himself, skinned his knee, comes in crying to the mom. His energy's all messed up. She's got great energy. They hug and they hug. That's all right, honey. As soon as their energies equilibrate, he runs outside again. So it wasn't really a big deal.
But at that level, it's still beyond our understanding of scientifically, if we were to make it objective, how that's actually working. We understand it's working, but if you were to put it, on papers into a textbook and try to teach that in school, it's beyond our understanding.
Well, now we know. Now that they've done a lot of research with meditation, we now know that meditation actually changes your hormones. It changes your brain waves. We know that you go from beta wave or gamma wave, which is, beta wave is every day. Is right now we're in beta. We're discussing.
Yeah.
You're doing your work and you're in beta. When you go into alpha, you're relaxing, and you go into theta, you're dreaming. When you go into delta, you're in deep sleep. So meditation is somewhere between alpha and theta, right? And when you get good at it, you're in theta, which means that you're aware, but not editing your thoughts. They're just, your thoughts are there, so you're just an awareness in the middle. But when you're in theta, that correlates to a change in your neurochemistry and your biochemistry. So yeah, we know that there's an absolute correlation between brain waves, mood, hormones. It's called the neuroendocrine axis. So, it's all pretty much known now. And then the other big thing that's come up in the last 12, 15 years is our gut biome, is the amount of organism. Now, these organisms, if you think about it, we've got, our brain is approximately 1.4, 1.5 kilograms in weight. And the microorganisms in our gut are 2 kilograms. Okay? They produce... We have 100 million nerve cells. Yeah,
because the 90% of our serotonin is developed in the gut. So if you got a shitty diet,
by bacteria.
This is why you can be depressed and things aren't going right. But if you clean it up, it can go well as well. Just before, let's jump into that, because I think that's a very interesting topic today, because it also directly relates to inflammation as well, and we can go down that route. I want to just take a kind of step back to where we were discussing with the brain. I've been doing a lot of reading on neuroplasticity, and trying to understand that. I guess that the easiest way to explain it from what I've read, without getting, we won't get to like doctor terminology. It's essentially, we have different pathways in our brain that connect. And let's say one of those pathways is today I get up, I look at my phone, I got up, I smoked a cigarette, I had a coffee, I should have exercised, and then I sat down, I should have had a shower. And now you've created this negative mind loop, a cycle. That's through neuroplasticity. And this is how your brain's connecting, because it's comfortable and easy. But through things such as diet, exercise, meditation, we can change that. Meaning, okay, I'm going to practice meditation. I get up, I read, then I get ready, then I start my day, then I, maybe exercise later, and I eat clean, and I'm fasting. And if you bring those all together, you're now kind of reprogramming or rebooting the mind through this process of neuroplasticity, which this is why it's difficult at first, because the brain's going, well, we used to do this every day, and this is so easy. Now you want to go on this route. And then once you can do that I was reading 60 days to break a habit, and then you get into this new healthy habit, you've kind of created a new path within the mind. Now, I might have butchered that entire concept, but are you able to kind of talk on that idea?
Yeah, sure. No, you did pretty good. You did pretty good. Except neuroplasticity wasn't the initial habit. But yeah, in fact, I've got about if I could have 2 weeks with nothing else to do, I could finish this book I'm writing. It's called Why It Has to Taste Good, I talk precisely what you're talking about, and that is habit formation, how to break habits, all that sort of thing, and what are habits, how do you get them, and all that. But basically, think of this: 90% of our mind is what they call subconscious.
It's okay, I can hear.
Not available to consciousness. It's subconscious. Okay. Psychologists tell us that 80% of our thoughts are negative. Your mother sitting on your shoulder saying, "Stop! Don't do that. You're gonna fall. You're gonna hurt yourself. You can't do that." That's what we all grow up with. No, stop, don't. Right? And that's pretty much 80% on our shoulders, right? You're in schools, don't do that, stand here, blah, blah, blah.
Is that nature or nurture? Like, for
That's
example,
nurture.
Okay, so if your mother, and that's normal, sorry as I interject, that's a normal part of growing up in the Western world. Don't,
No
cross
stop, don't.
no stop zone. That's normal. Now, what if that was to change at nurture? Would our mind be positive?
Right. Well, and that's the whole thing. In fact, there's one school of thought in psychology. It's called the Rogerian, or a humanistic school of thought. And that is, with unconditional positive regard, humans would be magical. Okay, but we're not given that. We're given the opposite, right? And we're basically told, when no stop, don't, means your instincts are not acceptable. And remember, you're being told no stop, don't at the age of 2 when you're innocent. You're not doing anything intentional.
When you're just learning to walk.
You're instinctual.
Yeah.
So to be told no by the 2 people in the world who are your gods, mom and dad.
Yeah.
That is the most profound rejection early in life. It's a pre-verbal, powerful rejection, which establishes the foundations of our later relationships, which is why we don't trust anybody. When we get married, we have to have a contract. Why do you have to make a civil contract out of something that should be one of the most sacred things in your life, is a marriage, right, and a family and things like that? But we make it a contract. Everything is a contract. We no longer trust each other. But I think it's because of that initial fundamental rejection. But anyway, as a result, that's our mind. And so 90% of our mind is inaccessible. But also realize that
this is the premise of the book. It's focusing on changing your habits
Eating
in your
habits.
mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
How can I get people to change their lives?
Yeah.
And
what is there? Do you touch upon psilocybin in that book at all? And have you done any research into that?
Yeah. I haven't gotten to that yet, but I will at the last 2 chapters.
Okay.
But I will get into that. But I'm interested in using mushrooms for not only mushrooms but ayahuasca for.
Have you tried it before?
With people with cancer, everything but ayahuasca.
You've never tried it.
No ayahuasca, but I've tried everything.
I've tried it once.
The real thing, or
the real thing. The problem I had with it was I don't believe you should be doing this type of therapy, essentially, in a group setting. And I did it in a group setting of 10 to 15 people.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just because they have to set it up that way. They need to make money.
Where were you?
Copenhagen.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, see that. If I were to do it, I'd go to Ecuador.
You have to go. I get that. You got to go to the right stuff. But they came from the U.S. They brought all the ingredients. I trusted it. It was definitely legit.
Yeah.
But, and again, at this point, I've been in Asia 12 years. So the beauty of, and I'll kind of digress quickly and come back, but the beauty of living in Asia is we don't have the news. We don't have the Channel 6 news. What we do at night is we look for information to read, and then you go down rabbit holes. So I've went down all these rabbit holes, which found ayahuasca. Now, the problem was when I did this ayahuasca ceremony, and I felt it was legit. It wasn't charlatans. It wasn't snake oil salesmen. It was quite legit, but it was the group setting with these 20 people. And I took it and I was fine. But the problem was all the people around me had different intentions. This one didn't treat her son right. This one maybe had an illness a while ago. There was a lot of negative energy, and I absorbed it right away. And when they asked me, what's your intention? I'm like, to be honest, I just want to see, I want to discover ayahuasca. That's my intention. And everyone else had this negative attention. So an hour into it, my mind went negative. I went, no, this is fake. This can't be real. And then I went into these negative mind loops. I'm like, and then I would come out of it and be like, no, it's fine. Your mind's playing tricks on you. And like, I could never get into the setting because I was watching all these people crying and puking and shitting and pissing around me. And I'm just sitting there going, try to control it. And that was actually the biggest issue. You can't try to control it. So my point of it all is when you go down and you do these medicines, traditional medicines, do not do them in a group setting. It needs to be one-on-one or maybe with one other person. And that was the biggest mistake.
Yeah, one
I
other
made.
person, I think.
Yeah, maximum. So we were talking about your book.
But the habits, breaking habits, and the neuroplasticity. So, if you think of so what we try to do is the conscious mind can only entertain, it can entertain less input than the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is vast. The conscious mind is not. So when you're learning to drive a car, you're learning with the conscious mind. You got to have both hands on the wheel. You got to have your foot down there. You got to be looking out the mirrors. You're very stiff. Now, as you learn it and it goes into the subconscious, you could be driving with one hand, talking on the phone, shaving. Now it's subconscious. Someone says, hey, what route did you take coming over? And you go, you don't remember because you weren't even in the car. You weren't even aware of it. You were thinking about I should have, could have.
Almost muscle memory to an extent.
Yeah, but it's subconscious.
Yeah.
So once it gets into subconscious, it's no longer, and that's what we become. See, we don't only have trains of thought. You've heard of that idea, trains of thought. I lost my train of thought. And we have trains of behavior, and these are behavioral trains that we get on, which is what you were talking about. You get up in the morning and you're making yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever it is, smoking a cigarette, whatever you're doing, you're not doing it. It is happening and you're somewhere else. Yeah. You're not present. You're thinking about what you're going to do later, what should have happened yesterday, I could have, I should have, and you're not present, and you're in this behavioral train. And that's why the only way you can get on top of it, my conclusion, because we all know there isn't a cigarette smoker alive that doesn't know they should not smoke. There's not an alcoholic that doesn't know he shouldn't. There's not a heroin addict that doesn't know they shouldn't shoot heroin. Why don't we do it? Because, and we can reduce it to a simple concept of willpower, self-control, stuff like that. Why don't we have that? Well, we don't have that, and I've done research, and you'll see if you ever read this book, it has to do with when you go to sleep. And without getting into the details, basically we are humanity arose out of the subequatorial zones. We're equatorial, subequatorial, and we're diurnal creatures. We're not nocturnal creatures. Mm-hmm. And so in any subequatorial zone, the latest that sunset would ever occur during the whole year would be around 7 p.m. latest. So let's just take that as the...
Well, in this part of the world.
Right, which is subequatorial, right? We're equatorial, basically. So you would go to sleep naturally, and your body's physiology was designed to go to sleep within an hour of sunset. And you would, before the machines, before electricity, you would. What are you going to do? Candlelight and stuff for a while. But you're going to go to sleep. And when you go to sleep at that time and you look at the sleep cycles and your hormones and your growth hormone and your cortisol and all of that stuff, and your DNA gets changed and you start repairing, and you understand that before 2 a.m., most of your sleep cycle is restorative and a little bit of REM or dreams. And then after 2 a.m., it's mostly dreams and a little bit of restorative. You go to bed at 11, you wake up at 7, you still got 8 hours, but you didn't get much restorative sleep. Yeah, you dreamt, so you're not crazy and you don't hate the world, but you haven't restored your physiology. You haven't restored your health. You haven't consolidated memories that well. You haven't done a lot of things like that. You're not going to have the self-control. So what I want people to understand mostly is that today began last night. Tomorrow begins tonight. And if you think of it as a train, when I was talking about behavioral trains, if you think of it as a train, if I get on the A train and I take it all the way, I'm going to wind up in Harlem. There's no way I'm going to wind up on the Upper East Side. I'm going to wind up in Harlem. So if you get on the A train again tonight, and you can't expect to get over there. That's the train you're on.
Mm-hmm.
So that A train starts at 11 p.m., midnight. If you want to wind up in a different place, you got to get on a different train. So it's an easy way for people to look at it. Today begins last night. Tomorrow begins tonight. So now you've gone to sleep, and I have teach you how to sleep hygiene, how to clean your mind out and everything. You get up in the morning, okay, and you feel fantastic. You've already done your meditation, your reading, you've worked out, you're feeling fantastic. You go out the door, you've taken care of mind, body, and spirit. You see that Winchell's donut, you see that McDonald's, and you just say, no way, I feel too great. But you're on your third cup of coffee, and you're not feeling too good. You're going to say, oh, what the hell? What the hell? And that's a gross way to look at it, but that's basically the foundation of it. So if you were going to have one New Year's resolution, go to sleep early. You go to sleep early, and you will then do what you already know.
So is it like you're synchronizing your sleep pattern with the sun?
With the sun and the earth.
The sun. So no matter what, even if you went to bed at, let's say, 11 o'clock and you woke up at 11 the next day, you haven't synchronized that with the sun. So even if you got that 12 hours, you're not going to feel the same if you did.
Correct.
And that's very true. I had a period, I would say, for about almost a year. I would go to bed. I'd be in my bed at 8 p.m.
Wow.
I'd be asleep by 9:30, and I'd naturally wake up at 4:30.
Exactly.
I did that for about a year. Then I started this business, and what happens is I work. It's hard. You pull yourself away from the computer. Next thing you know,
how did you feel then?
I felt amazing.
Yeah.
I could wake up at 4:30. I could meditate. I could go to the gym. I would fast. I fast 18 hours pretty much every day. I wouldn't even be hungry till 1 o'clock. The day would end, and then when I got into that routine, honestly, at 7:30, my eyes were shutting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
my eyes were shutting. But it took me a couple months to get into it, and it took 2 seconds to get out of it.
Yeah.
2 seconds.
Exactly. And that's the problem. Yeah. It's kind of like anybody who's ever had a problem with any substance, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, whatever. No matter how long they've been away from it, one puff, you're right back. It's not like you're starting over. You're right back.
Why is that?
To where you were, because you already have that. You already have that neurological loop.
It's already.
So if we go back to the neurochemistry, the way that, like for example, when you're learning to drive, you're developing these pathways. That's the plasticity, developing the pathways. So it's kind of like water going downhill. Think of water going downhill. So let's say
carving these.
So once it goes, it'll always go that way.
Yeah.
It'll always get that way. So to break it is very, very difficult. And that's why you have to do certain specific things. And replacing a habit that you don't want with a habit that you do want is the best way. Yeah. Just getting rid of a habit you can't.
So number one, like step one is sleep, essentially.
Yeah.
And I was reading, or I heard you say that sleep trumps diet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if as long as you can get control of your sleep pattern, then you can naturally everything should fall into place.
It will.
Yeah.
It will.
I believe that.
And even if you don't understand exactly what is the right diet, what you'll do, you'll learn. Because in the morning, what I always recommend is meditation, reading while your mind is clear before the day begins, and then exercise.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the morning, if you get up in the morning, you're feeling fantastic, you're going to read about nutrition. You're going to come to understand it. You'll learn. So even if you don't know, you have to have gotten that sleep. If you didn't get that sleep, you'll say, I don't want to. And you just never get to it. And if you're trying to read this stuff at night, forget it.
Yeah, the brain's shutting down, and like you were saying that by meditation and then reading is real. And the second you step out into the world, it's all fake.
Exactly.
So when you're stepping out the door, you're I don't know what's the word for that. You're kind of hindering your thought process. You're getting all this bullshit into the mind that's distracting it from the truth. And again, back to the point, I try to read at night. I can't read 3 pages. My eyes close. And then what ends up happening is I go back the next night and I don't even remember the 3 pages I just read.
Exactly. Yeah. So the only thing you want to read at night is for entertainment, like a novel, something that you don't need to remember. So instead of watching a TV program, read a Sidney Sheldon novel. It's fun. But yeah. So don't do anything seriously at night. And people do the opposite. Like they're in college, they're up all night. When I went to medical school, I remember I'd go to bed at 8, I'd wake up at 4. by the time we go into class at 9 and have a test, I was,
Yeah.
everybody else is like drinking coffee and they've got notes on their hands and they're like that. And I was just, I just studied it all.
But where that must be a sociological issue, because this is what we're kind of told. I would say primarily through the media as growing up. This is how you study. It's in the movies, right? Go to bed at night, study all through the night, drink your coffee.
Right.
Was there an agenda there? Like, well, actually, why don't you just do the opposite?
Right.
And the problem's fixed.
Right. Well, we've always known this. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. That actually comes back. It's throughout the 14th century. So we've always known this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that it got, and what we called it folklore, folk medicine, or whatever we called it. We've always known those truths. Yeah, they've been surpassed because what happened in the last 150 years is that all religions were replaced by the
Corporations.
Science. Science is the religion of the 20th and 21st century, and I know that in my role in life.
Modern day science.
Right.
Modern day.
Right. Yeah. I know that, right? Not astrology and stuff.
Yeah.
Or alchemy, right? But I know that because when I was in New York, I'd have Hasidic Jews, which are very, they're the Jews with they have the
Orthodox
Jews, right?
Yeah.
I'd have them come in and trust me more than their rabbi. I'd have Christians come in, trust me more than their priest or their minister, right? Or Muslims. In other words, science, they consider a doctor as I'm science. I'm one of the priests of science, the high priest of science. And so they trust me more. Now, if their rabbi had said to them, look, go to sleep early, pray all the time, be a good Jew, pray, eat the food, do all this, right? Well, I got to go talk to my doctor. So in other words, we have replaced religions with science, and that's the problem. And then, around right after the Second World War, after they divided up the world, they divided Kuwait, Iraq with Kuwait. They installed Israel, and they divided Pakistan and India.
One sec, just watch the mic a bit.
They divided Pakistan.
You're okay now. Yeah, it's only when if you go like that a bit, okay. It's like literally you can't go past there.
They divided Pakistan and India. When they did all that, they also decided to dumb down education right around that point. And that's when, I don't know if you ever saw the thing on the internet a couple of years ago, or 10 years ago. It was very interesting. They had the final exam for graduating in 1850 or 60, right? And in those days, it was only a secondary education. So, only 8th grade. You only went up to 8th grade.
And you could graduate at
and you were done.
But did you have the option you could continue, or that was it?
Yeah, well, that was about it, unless a few people went to college, right? But that was the primary education, right? It was 1 through 8. And then, right. So anyway, you and I couldn't pass that.
It was that difficult.
Yeah. But that was fundamental knowledge back then.
So they're you can compare like if you go to India, their education of, let's say, actually, I'll give a better example. There is a guy from Poland. I was reading a story. He came over to the USA and when he was in grade 3, and it took him 2 years before he did any homework, because grade 2 and 3 in the US for mathematics was absolute, he was years ahead from this, let's call it Eastern European education.
Exactly.
But that whole agenda is just to dumb down the population.
And they've succeeded.
Yeah.
They've really succeeded. And now, at least in the U.S., I'm not sure about Canada, but in the U.S., they're passing people regardless, right? You're just getting educated.
Yeah, you're getting at the end of the day, it's subjective on what the teacher...
Right.
Yeah. So back to your book, and then I think we'll jump into the gut biome side and kind of piece that all together. The main purpose of the book is breaking habits, and with a focus, is it focused heavily on sleep or more holistic, on the diet as well?
Yeah, no, that's just one part of it. Sleep.
One part of it.
Yeah, but it's more. It's it's interesting. The way it started was that we have my clinic in the U.S., the An Oasis of Healing. We have we put out a recipe book every couple years, right? Of raw vegan recipes,
Yep.
delicious. So anyway, Clotilde, my administrator there, said, "Can you write a preface for the food book, prep book?" I said, "Sure." So I started, and here I am. She's saying, "Okay, it's been 6 months, 7 months. What are you doing?" Anyway, but now it's like 180 pages.
Yeah, it's a book.
Yeah, it's a book because I couldn't stop. Because, where do you stop? And it's just unfolded. But I go into everything, everything. But sleep is an important part. But the point is, think about it. What makes people change?
Usually pressure. Something's going to pressure you into a corner, and then you make that change. And that's subjective, but it's for that person of like, they almost feel like they're being pushed off a cliff. And then you have the option there to make the change or fall off.
Exactly. Well, that's it. Right. And then, unfortunately, tragically, humans' best friends are pain and suffering. Without them, we don't change. Right. So you tell a 16-year-old, look, go to bed early, don't eat pizza, don't smoke and drink all night. And they're doing that and they feel fine. They get up in the morning and they're okay, right? It's not until they're in their late 20s they start saying, I can't do this anymore. I just don't feel good. So not until you suffer are you willing to change, right? And that's why I've always loved working with people with cancer, because with cancer, it's showtime. It's literally do or die. So when I work with people with cancer, they're always so willing and they're so easy to teach and they're
because they're at that point of they've reached the edge. And didn't you say I recall you saying cancer is kind of a slap in the face of like, okay, it's time to take a right turn.
Well, no, it's a tap on the shoulder by God.
Tap on the shoulder.
Tap on the shoulder by God saying, the path you're on is a little bit shorter than you would like. Make a right-hand turn here. Yeah. So they make a right-hand turn. And if you make that right-hand turn and you walk it, you'll become the person that you would never have become. And so all the people that I've worked with that have cancer is just a part of their history, it's not a current event, look back and say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me.
When you get a cancer patient that comes to you, do you have a set process, or is it kind of a patient by patient that you're assessing them on what type of integrative approach are you going to apply?
Well, no. The answer is that what I'm looking for is how they view their situation and where they are psychologically and spiritually.
So that's step one. You're going to dive before anything.
But I'm asking a medical history. I'm doing a regular doctor thing.
Yep.
But because to me, the labs and the imaging and the PET scans and all that stuff, although I need to know them so I know where we're beginning, they're not anywhere as important as the person's how they're approaching it, how they feel. But one thing to understand about cancer, to answer your question, I think what was implied there was that whether it's breast cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, brain cancer, the second word is cancer. The first word is location. So cancer is cancer is cancer is cancer. And the only difference between pancreatic cancer and breast cancer being in terms of prognosis is location. The pancreas is right next to all these organs. So if the cancer grows 1 centimeter, it's already in another organ causing problems, blockages.
It's spreading.
It's spreading. But the breast tumor could actually get 3, 4, 5 centimeters, and you're still stage 2 because you haven't affected anything. So, or if it's in the brain, it can't grow very far, otherwise you're dead, right? So we have to understand that. But when the pathologist, the laboratory doctor, when you send a biopsy to them and they look under the microscope, they're looking for specific morphological characteristics that identify because cancer is cancer is cancer is cancer. And in fact, there's a very interesting pathological diagnosis when they say, okay, he's got an adenocarcinoma that is undifferentiated. Okay, so just understand, let's take the mystery away from diagnosis is a name. It's nothing.
Yeah, it's what's the actual the root of the problem, which can come from the lifestyle. But I think I know where you're going with that. You're saying that, let's say from modern medicine, the pathologist, he's going to see that tumor, he's going to analyze it, and he's a robot at this stage, and he's going to pull up his book, right?
Well, not the
oncologist, but he's going to pass that information and say, you have this, and then the oncologist is going to pull his book up with modern medicine and go,
exactly,
that's the diagnosis,
right,
and it's 30 rounds of radiation,
right. They don't have to think.
They don't think.
There's an algorithm,
and that is because of protocols that have been implemented by the government in place so that those doctors cannot be held accountable.
Exactly. In other words, it's called standard of care, right? So, for example, let's say you're doing something that's outside of the standard of care. You're giving vitamin C and someone dies. Then you're in trouble. You're giving high-dose chemo and somebody dies. You're not, because you were in standard of care. Now, these protocols come from the pharmaceutical companies, right? Because they fund the research. So that's where that comes from. So, and every year there's a meeting by the American Society of Clinical Oncology, which is kind of the world central.
But these societies, they're making these protocols legalized or like official, and those protocols
by consensus. This is the way you treat breast cancer. By consensus, this is the way.
Who's saying that? Where's that narrative coming from?
Well, it's got, because if you presented your paper at ASCO, American Society of Clinical Oncology, now you've presented it there, and everybody goes, yay, like this, and it passed what they call peer-reviewed.
Yep.
It's law. It's law. So now, if you're going to do something contrary to that, you've got to come up with a clinical trial and prove that that's, or at least say that this is a secondary approach.
Okay, and you need funding for those clinical
Right.
trials, which is funded by the pharmaceutical. So therefore, because that clinical trials could cost millions.
Well, they say to bring a drug to market costs anywhere from $600 to $800 million.
Holy shit!
Right. So, and so these are the guys, and they need FDA approval. So who's the FDA working for? The guy that's paying in $600 to $800 million.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, so that's how they make it look like it's not being imposed upon you, but it's actually by scientific consensus. But see, science should never be by consensus. It should be by data. It's not consensus. We're not talking about a court of law here where the majority say that it's this. No.
It's like you're compromising on the solution to cure someone just for, the profitable benefit, but you're not giving the best solution at the end of the day.
Well, it's not, and it's not consensus. It's got to be proof. In other words, consensus could say, for example, that this particular medicine works, even if it doesn't. If consensus says it, then that's, and we see that now, what's going on in the world. I don't want to go into it too much, but what's going on in the world right now, by consensus and imposed consensus, you get this medicine, and blah, 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 blah. So that's the point. Consensus is not science. Science is facts.
Data.
That's it.
So the consensus side, let's say you need 100 peer reviews of doctors. Well, there's thousands and thousands of doctors in the U.S. You only need to, I'm trying to word that properly, get under the table essentially with these 100 people to get them to sign off. So there's a very gray area, and there's simple loopholes to get your medicine out there.
Well, the thing is this: the New England Journal of Medicine, right? The British Journal of Medicine, the American JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association. There are certain journals, right? And then in chemistry and in biology, there are certain journals that are considered the top journals.
Which they're businesses.
Okay, but those editors are appointed, and those editors will say, your article is not acceptable for publication. So the articles that are, in fact, we've seen this, like at Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital, which is a very well-known cancer hospital in New York. I think it was, 10 years ago now, 12 years ago. The head of it had to resign his post because he was taking bribes for having art research papers.
And this is public news.
This is public.
Yeah.
That's why. Otherwise, I don't usually.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
usually.
yeah.
I don't usually mention. What do you call it?
That's
Particular entities. Yeah.
What is
Slander.
Slander. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah. This is public news, so if you look it up,
Right. You look it up.
Yeah.
So he had to resign it because he was taking bribes to allow certain people to be published in their journal. You know, and that goes on a lot. So most of the time they don't get caught, right? But a lot of people submit papers and they don't get accepted. They don't get accepted. So it's really skewed about and you got to remember, it's these top journals are the only ones that the oncologists will read. Or if you're in neurology or your cardiology, it doesn't matter where you're in, but they'll only read that. So therefore they have kind of proscribed
they've made a program for those doctors. It's no different than watching the Channel 6 news.
Exactly.
It's very similar. This
Right.
is your information.
Talking points, right?
Yeah, these are your talking points. This is the way it works. That's it. Just if you're watching, Channel 6 at 6, and they're also going to tell you what to think and listen as well.
Exactly. So we're doing my colleague in the U.S.
I have a question. And how can we break this cycle? Like if you don't have enough data on side treatments, how can we break this cycle?
How can we break consensus?
Yes, if we don't have enough data on site treatments, it means we don't have we cannot break this consensus at all, right?
They're too powerful. What we have to do is, what I've had to do, me and people like me in the U.S., is you just practice outside of the norm, right? So that's why they call us alternative, or they call us holistic, as if we were.
Oh, see.
Yeah, but at least we're accepted. Soon that may not be the case, but right now, up till now, you've been, if as long as you don't do, like when I was in New York, I was continually being brought up before the medical board, right?
Yeah.
For giving vitamin C or whatever I was doing, low dose chemo with insulin, whatever I was doing, and I had to go to the medical board and defend it. I always did, fortunately, but the psychological stress, the cost, I had to get attorneys. That's why I moved to Arizona finally, because in Arizona, if you're a medical doctor and you also know homeopathy, you can get licensed as a homeopath.
So MDH.
An MDH, and then you can do everything you would do as a medical doctor, but more. So then if someone said, he's giving his patients vitamin C, my board would say, great, good.
He's allowed.
That's why I moved to Arizona. The only way, you can't, because you're not going to change consensus, because they control the research. And they control the journals, and they control academia. And
Even the studies publish everything.
Right. Like, for example, you talk to a regular oncologist about vitamin C, and he'll say there are no studies.
Have they
Go to PubMed and put in vitamin C and cancer, and there are 20, 30,000 peer-reviewed articles on vitamin C. So, and that's just to show you. Now, what does that tell you? The guy wasn't lying. He didn't know. He doesn't even know that there's studies. He doesn't even know, because he's a conventional guy.
And he's not getting that information, or he doesn't have access to it.
He does, but he doesn't know about it.
But he's being fed something else.
He's told, don't even read it.
Yeah. I was going to ask pretty much the same question. It's more or less along those lines, saying like, if we need to break the system, could that affect your medical license because you've went alternative, but your protection is being able to operate in the state of Arizona?
Right. Arizona and Nevada are the two states.
That's it. Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, any of these, like
you could be in trouble.
You could.
But you have to be very, very, very careful. Whereas you still have to be careful in there. In Arizona and Nevada, all you have to do is, the beauty is you have to stick to the science. So if I'm going to do a treatment protocol, right, I've got to present to my board before I start what I'm going to do and what the research is that shows it, and then give them my protocol. And if they say, okay, they approve it, then I can do it. And I'm fine.
But they could easily, let's say tomorrow, if they had, outside influence, they could botch that. They could. In theory.
In theory, they could.
Yeah. Do you see this happening at any time, or do you see because of the recent trends of alternative medicine, holistic medicine, and the pressure that the pharmaceutical companies are facing, especially today, that other states will open up to allow these MDH?
Well, they won't. I don't think they're going to go. They're going to do the MDH, but what they're going to do is they have medical freedom laws. In other words, if they have the medical freedom law, that means that it says that a patient has the right to choose the type of medicine they want to be involved with. And that means you can therefore legally practice under there. However, you're still practicing outside of the standard of care. Mm-hmm. So therefore, if there was a death, right, then you could be held liable. And so therefore a lot of these doctors in those other states, their malpractice is too high, or there's some other reason that they can't do it. There's a lot of prohibitions on it. Because think about it. People with cancer, stage 4 cancer, a lot are going to die, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so
it's almost like it's too. Again, you're at that turn. You have to make a decision.
Yeah. So the point is this: if they were to die getting chemo, it's okay. If they're to die in the other ones, so that's why it's yeah. We'll never. I don't think we'll ever, at least until the world goes through a metamorphosis, I don't think we'll ever change the way it is.
Do you see that happening at any time soon? Because my opinion is, with recent events, it seems like it's going in the complete opposite direction. If anything, it's going to get worse, more power, more control. And I don't really think there's much we can do. I think my generation will kind of get through it. We'll be at the end. But if I were to have kids, it's not looking too good.
I agree with you. I think that humanity has a collective karma. We have a collective destiny. And for example, if we didn't change what we were doing with the oceans, the way we fish them, by 2050, the oceans would be dead, and therefore life on Earth would be dead. Because if you lose the oceans, that's where two-thirds of our oxygen comes from there. I mean, it's more than just that. But really, by the way we're overfishing, and I'm not even talking about the pollution. I'm talking about the overfishing, and the sharks and stuff.
Because you'll destroy the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's that. We're spilling oil. We're spilling nuclear waste. We're doing all of these things. So the point is this: the universe balances, and there's going to be a balance one way or another. And I think if it wasn't us culling each other, we're going to kill each other. We're going to kill 90% of us in the next decade or so. If it didn't, I think we'd be hit with a meteor. Something, nature has to balance. So you're right. I see a long period of darkness. I see a second dark age. And then we'll come out of it. And probably 3 or 4 generations from now, we'll start to maybe come out of it. I think we're going to go through a, what was that movie?
Oh, the Hunger Games? Hunger Games.
We're going to go through that.
Yeah. This Orwellian style under, scrutiny.
And also, what was that other one? Divergent. I mean, every dystopian movie in one is what's happening now. All of them, except there's no exit door. Do
you think a lot of the movies, I mean, again, essentially movies that we know it today, they're what? They're only 30, 40 years old. Have they been designed to program us for this moment?
We know that. We know the CIA controlled Hollywood. We know that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we'll come back to that, but I think we're on an interesting topic. Some people are, and again, this is not my opinion. It's a lot of opinions. They're regurgitated opinions.
Yeah.
No, not a lot of people have profound opinions. Right. Let's be honest.
Right.
One of my regurgitated opinions is that are they preparing for an alien invasion, a fake alien invasion, because a lot of the movies have been programmed that way, and like you're saying, it's like this world is coming together with every worst disaster possible in one, from a meteor strike to essentially zombie apocalypse of what's going on. And the third one they've always programmed has been alien invasion. I'm wondering, do you think that's a possibility, or it's completely off the rails?
Well, I really, I've actually had 2 encounters myself. So,
Okay.
yeah. So I mean, I don't think alien is a, plus even
In Arizona, or?
no, in where I grew up in California, first one, and the other one was way up in Canada. But I mean, these were.
What are you willing to talk
Oh,
about?
yeah.
What
Well,
happened on the California?
in California when I was like,
And what year was this made?
I was like 16
16.
or 16, and friends and I were up camping in a place called Sespe Creek. I grew up in L.A. It was out in the mountains, and it was probably around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were just gathering wood because it was going to get dark in about an hour.
Yep.
And we were gathering wood, and then we heard a, and so we looked up, and there was this sphere, bigger than a house, just, and just going like that. I remember looking at it, and then the next thing I knew is it was nighttime, and we had a fire going.
You kind of
Lost time,
lost track.
and I don't know. And then we never talked about it.
Ever again?
We never talked about it. Now and then I remembered this about.
Is this in the 70s or?
Let's see, I was 16, so it was 1960. No, I was born. So it was 1967, 68.
Okay. Yeah. And this is actually still that would be a relatively new case in theory. Like in theory, a lot of this stuff happened with, what was it? Roswell, and then Betty and Barney. There's a famous story about the the white and black couple, but that's something else.
So I called I remember about maybe 20, 30, 25 years ago, I called no, not even 20 years ago. I called I like thought about that. So I called up a couple of my old friends and said, "You remember?" They go, "Yeah." They remembered. They go, "Why didn't we do anything?" I don't know. And it was weird. So anyway, there was that. And then this other one was recently. This was about, my kid is 28 now, so he was 8, 9, 10.
This is in Canada.
Yeah, so we were in New York. I took them to summer camp up in Canada.
Whereabouts?
In Quebec.
Quebec. Okay.
So we're up there, and it was the last day of camp, so I went to pick them up, he and his sister. And he and I were standing out on the balcony just looking because the stars were fantastic. And so we saw this, which we thought was the Little Dipper, right? That formation, right? Except that there's one star, and these other 4 came around it. And then they all surrounded it. And I said, "Are you seeing this?" You know, it was like, it didn't happen. It happened slow enough so that we could talk about it. And then they got around it. And then it started firing in all directions, and then went, and then they went, it was gone. And did you see that? Yeah. So then what was interesting is that when he got back, because this is pre-cell phones and everything.
Yeah.
When we got back to New York, he asked his friend told him, I was on the roof and I saw the same kind of thing. So that was it. So those are the 2 things I saw. And then forget all that. Just when you think that there's 200 billion stars in our Milky Way, and we know that in just that part of the universe that we've been able to see, there's at least 100 billion, 200 billion galaxies. It's impossible, not improbable, impossible for some sort of situation to exist where intelligence and life would be.
So, yeah, I've went down those rabbit holes. I believe, I don't believe. I get a little crisscrossed in it all. The only problem that always confuses me is the fact that how quickly life comes and goes on a planet, which means the timing for another civilization, they would have to be around for 1 billion years to catch up to our little time, our glimpse of time, which means like I think it's nearly impossible that two civilizations, well, not impossible, but to grow at the same rate, let's say, and let's say they were able to get the technology and make it over here. I think they would have to be around for such a long time that they would be essentially populating the galaxy to be able to get to us, which means whatever they are, if they're beings or they're robots or whatever the hell they are, they're so far ahead of us in terms of technology that our ego can't even understand it.
Well, right. And I don't think they would, I think once a group would get to that point, I think they'd be beyond
dimensions, no?
Beyond the mentality that we have on Earth of wanting to own real estate and greed. I think they'd be beyond that. I think in order to do that, in fact, do you know what's his name, Greer?
Yes.
Look at his stuff, right?
Right. Not Sam Greer, but I know who you're talking about.
He's a doctor who got into
SETI. I think he's involved SETI.
Well, he's
search for extraterrestrial.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And he's the one that briefs the presidents.
Yeah.
And stuff. He's the real deal. Well, he says that he's made contact, and he says that the way they go around, they get around, because think about it. Just the Milky Way, what is it, 100 million light years across? Or
100 million light years. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so even you're going at speed of light, it's going to take you. You can't even get to the nearest thing. So, so the point is this: that travel has to go beyond. It has to be out of the time space.
It has to leave our understanding of physics.
Yeah, exactly.
It's something completely different.
Right. So he says this through basically meditation. You're just there. You're just there. And and what's very interesting, as I remember back in the 60s, that the CIA had training facilities in San Francisco. They were training remote viewing. I don't know if you've ever heard of remote.
Yeah, there's a movie about that, something Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney.
Oh, really?
That whole movie is about remote viewing. It's about 10 years old. George Clooney and I think maybe I want to say John Goodman, but I'm not sure, or possibly Jeff Bridges. Anyways, it is
great actor.
It is George Clooney, and it's called Men Who Stare at Goats, and that's the whole premise.
I got to read that.
Yeah.
But so the Soviets and the CIAs, then they both did it, and if you a lot of those people talked about it. They actually accurately would identify a Soviet sub off of whatever 100 miles off of New York Harbor down deep. Which we couldn't detect. So in other words, that stuff works. So if that worked, and the people that did it said that they actually were able to go out to other planets and stuff like that. So if that stuff is possible, which apparently it is, otherwise these government programs wouldn't have been in existence for decades. I mean, literally decades. And I mean, so in other words, we have so much hidden from us. It's hard to know, but you've got to just be able to sift through the madness.
Yeah, have you ever heard about Akashic readings? Akashic readings. Have you tried that meditation?
Akashic, no.
Akashic. Have you tried it? There's a good one on YouTube. I'll send it to you. It's about 45 minutes.
Huh.
You understand the premise of what it is, and they say accessing the 13th dimension, but and all physicists say the math exists up until the 13th dimension, and then that's where it breaks down. This is not pseudoscience. This is science. This is science. This is mathematics. And basically the Akashic readings, I always pronounce it wrong. But anyway, essentially what it is, it's
Akashic.
It's accessing through meditation a library of existence of all time, infinitely, forever. And what you can do is through this meditation, you go through a library, and at the end in the library, you end up at a book. And when you get to the book, you can open the book and you can ask the book anything you want. You can say, I want to go to the year 300,000 BC, show me that page, and you can enter it. I've tried it about 3 or 4 times. Every time I get I've got down the library hall, I've got to the book, and every time I get to the book, I'm just flipping white pages. And I know what the problem is. I get too excited or something falls apart there, or too eager. The ego comes in and you're too, when you really, you want something too much and it doesn't.
Well, maybe you didn't pre-decide what you want, what page.
Yeah,
Have you
that
pre-decided?
no, I don't. I
That's the
usually
thing.
I'm
So
trying to just
pre-decide
get
next
there.
time.
Yeah.
Say,
But-
okay, I want to go to 100. I want to go to the year AD 0, AD 54. So I want to see if Jesus really existed, or something. You know.
And you can do that, and they say you can jump in and out at anywhere you
What
want.
Akasha is, what the idea comes from. This comes from ancient alchemy and ancient understanding. Because if you understand that the original science was alchemy, and out of it came astronomy, mathematics.
But alchemy is essentially, wasn't it turning, or the
that
Alchemist?
That was disinformation.
Okay, because I've read the book The Alchemist, and it's all turning. What is it?
Lead into gold.
Yes.
No, nothing
Okay.
to do with it.
What is it? So yeah, explain that more, because that's honestly what I thought it all that it was.
Alchemy is very difficult to explain, but let me just go to the Akashic for a minute.
Okay, yeah.
Akasha, the Akasha is that most subtle and fundamental essential substance that is the fabric of existence, that is everywhere. Okay, it is within space. It is everywhere, but it's a fundamental. The alchemists called it ether.
The ether.
The fifth element.
Ah, okay.
Where there's earth, air, fire, and water, and that was the ether. That was the fundamental, essential substance. So anything that ever happens imprints it. In other words, makes a
Yes,
record.
correct.
That's why it has all the records, because everything that ever happened in Akasha.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's an imprint, and you can go back and read that imprint. But it's not reading like a book. It's just being able to witness it, experience it. That's what Akasha is, and that's why they call it the Akashic records. But alchemy was, the first alchemist was Hermes, probably, and Hermes Trismegistus, Egyptian god, king, and then there were many throughout the ages. And an alchemist
he wasn't a witch doctor. It's different than, like, I don't want to say a witch doctor or a medicine man. It's completely different.
Right.
A sorcerer at this level, like, would that?
Right, but white, and it was never. They would never. You would
dark,
never. Not dark.
No negative, like, intention.
Right. But what they did was basically what they said. Their philosophy is that God created the earth in a way such that it was, what's their word? I forget their word. It's a great word. But anyway, not perfect.
Like, in terms of uncertainty?
No,
or
that they grow and then they die.
a cycle.
And they grow and then they die, yeah. But there's a word they used. Corruptible. It was corruptible. So then the final creation was man, men and women, was humanity. So imagine, their idea was this is the way they say it. Imagine you're God. You could make everything perfect. Instead of doing that, you want to make it almost, and then your last creation is man, and you want him or her to take it, for them to do it. And that gives you, anyway, that's their idea. So the idea that the job of the alchemist is to take this process that goes on in the earth, whereas if something grows and then it dies, and then it goes back down into what they call the first matter, and then it becomes something new again. To take that cycle and to take it to the point of perfection. So that's what they do. And they make what's called the Philosopher's Stone, and they say that's what Jesus had. That's what Apollonius of Tyana, who a lot of people say that Apollonius was confused with Jesus. A lot of his lectures and his sermons and stuff, right around the same, he was Greek, right around the same time. So Apollonius and Jesus got confused in those days.
So it's almost like essentially magic, how we would think of magic, because it's beyond our understanding of physics and chemistry. Does this still exist today, and do people have that knowledge?
Here's something you can check out that I think will pretty much blow your mind. There was a guy named, how could I forget? Well, it'll come to me. Anyway, the Count Count Saint Germain, but so they call him Le Comte de Saint Germain. He was in France. Anyway, he's in the history books. You can look him up.
Yep.
Count Saint Germain. In fact, in Paris, Boulevard Saint Germain, he was well known. Now, Saint Germain was, and you can read this. It was, in fact, in the memoirs of Marie Antoinette. I forget the woman's name who wrote that. Said that she goes, I met this most remarkable gentleman when I was doing when I was a debutante, 18 years old or whatever it was. I was a debutante. Was a remarkable gentleman. I would say he was in his early 40s, mid 40s.
Just push that up a bit.
A very, very polished gentleman, and we had a ball. He hosted a large ball, and at everyone's plate was some gold as a gift. And he was a very gracious gentleman. Anyway, and she goes, later on, she goes, now, I was in my 70s, 80s, whatever, and I attended a ball. And there he was, same age, hadn't aged. The other thing...
this is in her memoirs. So
this is in her memoirs.
So again, anyone can look this up.
Right. And you can look it up, The Man Who Wouldn't Die.
Okay.
And so they... And what they would find is Saint Germain, he was a, what do you call it?
Like a sorcerer?
No. He was a, what's the word? Confidant or counselor to the royal families of Europe. So the royal records, for example, in England with King Charles, have him at the court helping them with their decisions, let's say on Tuesday, May 3rd. And then on Wednesday, May 4th, he's in Germany. Impossible in those days.
So what do you think was happening?
So he was all over the place. I don't know.
Yeah, at that point,
we don't know. But the point is, he's in these records. He's well known. He was so well known. There's the boulevard. There's the biggest, most well known boulevard in, not the Champs-Élysées, but actually Boulevard Saint-Germain was forever considered that. So he was a well-respected gentleman, and he never aged. Appeared on the scenes in Europe at, I guess, I forget, and then exited at about a 110-year period.
As in he died, and there's records of him passing away or just disappearing?
Just no longer there.
Disappearing.
And when he first appeared, he was in that age.
Yeah.
And so he exists. So there's another guy, Thomas Bond. And so if you look throughout history, anyway, but we don't focus on that. We, in our training and our education, we don't do that. But anyway, the point is he was an alchemist.
Okay.
Right? And he didn't flaunt it, or didn't do anything. He was just living his life, and he didn't, he wrote books. I mean, he wrote that he's written about, but there were other guys that his contemporaries, like Thomas Vaughan is a great guy.
Where do you think they derive from initially? Meaning, like, you can't just be an alchemist. He's got to have the information passed on from someone. Where do you think that lineage comes from?
Well, there's books.
And you can start to trace the lineage. Is it very?
And it goes back to
is it part of but is it part of a society, and that it's passed through family and blood, or is it you're choosing people as you pass that information on?
It's an interesting thing that there is no society, there is no group. It's a hard search. You have to become obsessed with it, right, and realize that it's real, and then abandon everything in your life. And it's been that way since the beginning. So how many people are going to do that? How many people, especially today?
Because you're coming from the holistic side, but also the science side. Mm-hmm. From your scientific school of thought, what do you think that could be if you're trying to be objective about it in terms of the data and the facts? What do you think's going on there? Or is it too?
It's beyond. It's beyond. Yeah. It's not science. Or it's ultimate science.
Like science that we haven't acquired
exactly.
Yet. Yeah.
Exactly. I think I have somewhere in, if we're listening to our second mind, our gut, yeah. I think it's real. Mm-hmm. And I think it's possible. So therefore, I just think we don't understand it. And I think it requires a more evolved species. I think we're not, as a species, not evolved enough. I think there's been individuals throughout history who have been allowed to do that.
You think it's we don't have the brain capacity yet?
No, we have it.
We have it?
We have it, absolutely.
We just don't have the information.
We're not spiritually ready
Spiritually.
to comprehend it.
Okay.
Yeah. What the whole idea with the lead to gold, where that came from, is that when you have the final product of the work, they always say alchemy. Alchemist really was a transformation of themselves spiritually to become, but that wasn't it. It was really physical work. They worked in the laboratory. You had to know what the first matter was and all this stuff. Anyway, they come out with this thing finally. It's called the Philosopher's Stone, and it's in a state of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's an element. It's not going to go through the cycle of death and decay. It's not corruptible. So whatever you touch it to goes to that state too. So they said all metals are on their way to becoming gold, because gold is the most fundamental, and it is. That's why it became something we trade and as a
because it is rare.
It doesn't rust.
Yep.
It doesn't. It's uncorruptible. In that of the metals, it's uncorruptible.
So that's how this story came about.
Right, and they put that's why they use it for dental fillings and things like that. Gold is
it's a great semiconductor. It's used for everything. I mean, every single piece of electronics has gold in here.
Right. So if you touch this to lead, it will go to gold, because that's all metals are on their way. If you touched it to somebody who was unwell, it would make them well.
Oh, okay.
That was the idea. If you touched it to a blind person, they would see. That's the idea. I don't know.
It's beyond our understanding.
I can't.
So that we can connect that, because a lot of people, they might hear that and be like, what the hell are they talking about? But let's go back 1,000 years. If you were to take a piece of technology or information and more about the science, not the technology side, and show something that you're getting from medicine today that is so profound, and introduce it to someone 1,000 years ago, what today would shock them?
You mean not technology?
Not technology, like more in terms of science and medicine and practices that you're using, that if you went back 1,000 years and introduced it to them, they might not even believe it.
Well, I'll tell you something. I think only the thing that would shock them would be technology, because if we go back to 300 BC, 200 BC, Hippocrates, who said, "Let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food." I think that we have, that knowledge has always been, and that's what I mean. Now, because I consider a drug, for example, if I were to give someone a drug, that's technology, because it's a technology.
Yeah.
It's technology. But if we go back to healing, truth and healing, that's never changed. So the truth doesn't change. So I don't think I would be able to shock anybody unless I had a cell phone.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, on the technology side. Right. But if you were to bring back actual medicine, which is, again, synthetic, and
because the real medicine is always been the real
always
medicine.
been in the food.
It's always been. In fact, when it's very interesting. A lot of the chemotherapies that are used in medicine were the pharmaceutical companies sent their scientists, and they'd go to the jungles and find out what the indigenous peoples use. So, for example, they used artesunate, or they used the wormwood plant, and we found out that artesunate, this one ingredient, and so a lot of the taxols, the taxanes, which are chemotherapies, come from the jungle, but it was one element out of it. So, but eaten in its full form, and the full leaf and the full plant, it's not toxic, right? But what they did was they took this out.
Well, no, it's a lot of our medicines. They're derived. They're even fungal based. Let's say penicillin.
Exactly.
It's a synthetic fungus now, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
And the reason they do that is because, well, you can't have people taking a fungus that anyone can grow. You need to turn it and patent the chemical and sell the chemical. And that's my understanding of how that works. Do you agree at that level?
Well, yeah. So in other words, it's for some, you cannot patent nature.
That's my point.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order to get something patented, it has to be unnatural.
Yes.
By definition. So, for example, when you go to a retail pharmacy to buy a drug that your doctor wrote a prescription for, and it's patented, that means it's not natural.
And it says Pfizer.
Right. It says Pfizer.
They own the patent to that chemical.
Yeah. So what they've done, so when let's say, for example, in the 90s, there was a large trial of hundreds of thousands of women. It was called the Women's Health Initiative, where they were testing oral contraceptives. They had to stop this trial because the women who were taking it were dying of all causes at a much greater degree. And that gave a bad name to hormone manipulation or hormone balancing.
Yep.
But it turns out it wasn't hormone balancing, is they were using patented drugs. So they got their estrogen and progesterones from horses in their urine. Mm-hmm. They took the natural hormone compound and they added like a methane group or whatever they added. They changed it. Now it's not natural. They can patent it.
Yes.
Now our body is a natural thing.
We should be able to heal ourselves.
So
naturally.
we can only utilize that which is natural. We can't utilize it. So for example, if I ate saran wrap, I can't metabolize it. I can't turn it into flesh and blood. If I ate aluminum, I cannot. I need to eat real stuff. That's why when I eat a Hostess Twinkie, which has got 99 chemicals in it and a little bit of nutrition, I can't assimilate it. In other words, it's not convertible into flesh and blood. So my body spends all of its energy getting rid of it because it's not real. You understand? So in other words, and that's what drugs are. So it wasn't until Jonathan Wright came along. He's a great physician, medical doctor in Tacoma, Washington. And he and a guy named Gabby, who brought to life biologically identical or bioidentical hormones, where we take, for example, certain species of yams have hormones similar to humans, and you can just play with them in your compounding pharmacy.
Like higher doses of testosterone.
Right.
Similar to other foods, let's say like bean sprouts or tofu have higher levels of estrogen.
Right.
So you're getting the hormone from the food.
Well, not from the food. No, they actually make it. You can make it into a topical agent. You can make it into a pill, right? And actually, so it's bioidentical. In other words, it's not animal derived. It's not synthetic. It's biologically. And it's identical. If you look at it with an electron spec, they're the same molecule. So you're not getting a hybridized molecule. You're not getting a molecule with something extra on it that's synthetic.
But the molecule is synthetic in a sense. Like the molecule is the same, but then they're producing the molecule in a lab. Or are they deriving it from the food itself?
From the food itself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's derived from food.
Yeah, it's similar to...
That's a compounding pharmacy versus a retail pharmacy.
Yeah, it's similar to what's going on. There's a study at the University of Singapore, I believe, with a guy, I want to say Dr. Robert Bielman. He's doing a big study on ergothioneine. Are you familiar? It's a non-essential amino acid that they're trying to connect to anti-aging. And ergothioneine. So it's like ERGOTHIENE.
Thionine, not thiamine.
Thionine, yeah, not thiamine. It's derived. It's found in a lot of mushrooms, but specifically in like oyster mushrooms and shiitake. But it's high dosages are in oyster, and they're trying to prove that by synthetically recreating this ergothioneine from the oyster mushroom, because the problem is it's so minuscule within the oyster mushroom that you'd have to eat like a kilo a day to get what they're trying to give you, which is it's impossible. How can you eat that? And they're proving that this ergothioneine might be the human elixir or the fountain of youth. This study, it's being done in human trials in Singapore, so it's been fast tracked. And it's interesting information, because I guess I could segue into that. Do you believe that with medicine or just naturally that we can reverse aging?
Well, we have to first define what is aging.
Aging is oxidation, right? Essentially, our body is oxidizing, or no different than leaving an apple out on the counter for 3-4 days.
Right. It's senescence, but there was a doctor, Carroll, I forget his first name, Nobel laureate, 1915, took chicken hearts And chicken, as you know, if you've ever taken a heart, if you ever took biology, you take a heart out, you cut it in half, both halves are still beating. You cut them in half, they're still beating, right? Because they have an intrinsic, heart muscle has an intrinsic ability to beat. It doesn't have to be fired on like a skeletal muscle. It just beats. So he put them in there in Petri dishes, and he wanted to see how long they would live if he prevented any waste from accumulating. So he started this experiment in 1915. 1-5. In the early 50s, they finally stopped the experiment. And I think what happened was someone forgot to do something, or they just abandoned it because chickens don't live that long.
What was his intention on that experiment?
To see what by not allowing waste to accumulate. Okay, and he proved it. In other words, how far would that have gone? We don't know, and they're probably someone else is probably replicating it. But the point is this: if waste does not accumulate, our potential, when you read in the Bible where people were living an average of 912 years before the flood,
Yep.
right? Some 986, whatever. That's very, very plausible. So waste accumulation. So, for example, I look at the Hanzas or the Abkhansias that live up in the northern parts of Georgia, Russia, running around at 140, 150, fathering children at the age of 110, moving. Okay, so if that's happening, then what are we doing? So obviously, we've got to...
What are they doing to be able to...
They're living in harmony with nature. And they're not accumulating waste. So what I see aging is this. Aging is the accumulation of waste, becoming toxic. And there's a variety of reasons why.
Well, I'm just missing that. What do you mean by the accumulation of waste from what we're ingesting into our body?
We have 5 systems to eliminate waste. However, there's also metabolic waste that accumulate. Now, waste, there's two kinds of waste. Basically, what I take in, if I take in garbage in, it's got to get out. Yeah. But also just basic metabolism produces metabolic waste. For example, the hydroxyl free radical. There's lots of metabolic, carbon dioxide is a metabolic waste, right? Which comes out when we exhale and stuff like that. So metabolic wastes are produced, and waste that comes in. So what happens is we don't excrete it. For example, our colon is 1.5 meters long, or 5 feet long.
5 feet, yes.
Okay. 5 feet, 1.5. Anyway, we have 1 bowel movement a day, 2 bowel movements a day. That means there's only this much left inside.
So what's happening?
Well, one of the main jobs of the colon is to reabsorb the remaining 10 to 15% of the water. Okay, so that takes 6 hours. Mm-hmm. So after 6 hours, if it's not evacuated, the colon continues to do its job. And its job is to continue to extract water. So the stool becomes harder and harder and harder. That's why constipation is hard stools. But in addition to the water, it's also pulling out wastes and toxins. Now, there's something called the enterohepatic circulation. Entero refers to the intestines. Mm-hmm. Hepatic refers to the liver. And what that circulation is that all of the intestines and pancreas and all the organs in the
stomach,
in the gut,
yep,
all drain into a venous system that coalesces into what's called the portal vein, and the portal vein goes right back into the liver. And the reason is because everything that is eaten and ingested is supposed to go to the liver,
like a filter system. The liver is filtering.
Detoxifies it, yeah, right?
But these toxins still have to go through it.
So that's what's happening. So when you're not evacuating, you're continually intoxicating your liver. And how quick is the enterohepatic circulation? Every 4 minutes. So by you not cleaning your bowels out, every 4 minutes you are recycling toxins into your liver. So your liver is busy. And then if you consider that 60 to 70% of our lymphoid tissue, which is our immune system, is in our gut, and it is also dealing with all of that the best thing you can do for an immune boost is do a colonic, clean out your colon, right?
So like an enema.
An enema will only gets the rectum and maybe a small part of the distal colon.
Okay.
But or a long fast or a juice cleanse. There are ways of getting it out.
And that's is that going to clean the colon and intestinal walls as well?
Yeah.
It's like it's changing your oil.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. And let's say 100 years ago, 200 years ago, before, because it's fair to say all the food in the grocery store, I would say 99% of the stuff we eat, it didn't exist 100 years ago, right? So did they have to do this back then, or is it because of recent diet that we should be doing this?
It's interesting. This, if anyone ever has read Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, back then, they talked about it then. So the point is for the most part, think about it too. Also, it's from the kind of food we eat. So even though they didn't have the chemicals in the processed food, they did cook it. They had lots of fats and oils and greases and things like that. So they were eating food that wasn't. If you study cooking, if you understand what cooking is from a chemist's point of view, you're producing what are called Maillard chemicals.
Correct.
And these Maillard chemicals are carcinogens, right? And there's all kinds. There's Strecker degradation. There's a whole process that food goes through. So when you just steam or boil food, okay, you eliminate the enzymes.
You're killing the enzyme.
And when you don't have enzymes, when something doesn't have its own intrinsic enzymes, then you lose that portion of digestion. Okay?
And the potency of the nutritional value as well.
It's gone. Yeah,
it's gone.
Diminished greatly. But the first part of digestion is when you eat the food, it would go into your upper part of your stomach, and there it would go through autodigestion, through its own enzymatic degradation. Then it would fall into the lower part of your stomach, where then that's where the pepsin and pepsinogen and all these different enzymes and acids, all that get together and prepare it for the duodenum. And the duodenum, it's where it's exposed to pancreatic enzymes and all that. So now, if you're eating food that's full of enzymes, what's going to arrive at the pancreas and what's going to arrive at the cells lining the duodenum is a probably 40% digested product, chyme, CHYME. So the work there is not that much. But if everything I'm eating has had all the enzymes removed, what's arriving there is going to require that my pancreas and my small intestines work extra hard. And what happens when things work extra hard? They get enlarged. It's called hypertrophy. We do that on purpose for our muscles.
So you mean by eating cooked food, you're adding extra stress on your digestive system?
And it becomes hypertrophied, enlarged, and inefficient. You don't want an enlarged heart. You don't want an enlarged thyroid. You want enlarged muscles, but up to a point. If your muscles were so big, you'd have to hire someone to clean you off when you went to the toilet.
Yeah.
Right? You couldn't tie your shoes. So there's a point at which you reach inefficiency. And that's what happens. So when they've done experiments with animals, cooked versus uncooked, the cooked have enlarged, inefficient pancreas, enlarged, inefficient small intestines, etc. So so that's just steaming it. And there's a great study.
Because you're adding heat to it.
Right.
I mean, I've done some work in Chiang Mai, part of these products, and I'm working with some guys, and they're dealing with freeze drying techniques on supplements. So they take stuff from the mountains, and then they use refrigeration technology. Actually, they're one of the only in the world that do it. And what happens is, by using freeze drying techniques and turning the supplements into powder, like ginger and turmeric and whatnot, and amalaki, you don't break down the enzyme tail. It's molecular. The structure of, like, let's say the mitochondrion itself does not break down. And you can look at it under a microscope between, let's say I did a freeze drying technique to, not a cold press, but adding heat to turn it into powder. And they put that on. It's two different things.
Exactly.
It's two different things. So
heat is, in chemistry, is called an endothermic chemical reaction. It's no longer the same thing.
You've destroyed the enzyme.
Right.
You've destroyed the nutrition.
Right. It's no longer the same. So when you go to the chef, and if you were to get samples of all the food prior to cooking, look at it with an electron microscope, and then after, you've got different substances. You've gone through a chemical experiment. So now, but I'm saying, just with steaming and boiling, because we know that enzymes lose their tertiary structure at 118 Fahrenheit and 47 centigrade. They permanently lose it. If you go up to 43 and then back down, like dehydrating, right? It loses it for a while, but it's restored. But after that, it's permanently. So we know if boiling is 212 or 100 centigrade or 212 Fahrenheit, it's permanently gone. You've lost the enzymes. But grilling, frying, baking, anything like that. Now, on top of having dead food, you now have carcinogenic substances, right? And so in other words, that's why we still had cancer back in those days. That's why we still had those things, and that's why. But now it's just that we have, Twinkies is not
hot dogs and whatever.
It's not even close to food.
So the question was, let's say if we even predated that to 12,000 years ago, I'm not sure how far we would have to go back till we invented fire. 30, 40,000 years ago, maybe.
Discovered it, yeah.
Maybe something like this. So pre-fire, when we had to eat raw, even raw meat, raw vegetables. If that was your diet, would you need to do these these
enemas or colonics? No.
Yeah, any type of colonics. You wouldn't need to.
No, and even let's say even back 100, 200 years ago, most people, it was only the wealthy who could afford to have all of these special dishes, right? But the average person probably ate a lot of leaves and a lot of grains and stuff. The poor people, the farmers and things like that. And when we look at the deaths, they lived longer, right? 100 years ago in the U.S., 0.5%, 0.5% had cancer. Today, 1 out of 2 men, 1 out of 3 women. So if it were genetic, every one of our grandparents, or at least one of each grandparent should have had, one of each pair of grandparents should have had cancer. If 1 out of 2 men and 1 out of 3, so you can see it's not genetic, obviously.
But isn't this going to destroy society as we know it? Because it's going to become genetic. Meaning, let's say my ancestors 500 years ago, they were cancer-free, essentially. And then in the past 100, 150 years, because of the diet, cancer... there's a book, it's called The Gene Theory. Oh, I have it downstairs. But it's more about genetics, and it's explaining that you do pass that down through lineage. So my point is that because of this, our new diet that's very synthetic, maybe my grandparents, they did have cancer. They survived, but now they are getting cancer, and they're going to now pass that down. But maybe prior to them, it didn't really exist.
Well, there's some epigenetic modifications that are passed down. However, it's not that you get a gene to produce cancer, because cancer is an adaptive response. Cancer is simply loss when you lose a certain percentage of mitochondria, and you can no longer produce energy in that way, which is called oxidative phosphorylation. You go into a fail-safe mode of energy production called fermentation or glycolysis. Okay, so a chronically fermenting cell is a cancer cell. That's what it is. So then the genetic changes are downstream epiphenomenon. They're things that happen to accommodate this new metabolic requirement of fermentation. So this gene turns on, this gene turns off. So now that it can accommodate, that's what cancer is. So there's no gene. So when for example, you look at the BRCA genes, which Angelina Jolie made famous, the BRCA genes for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, things like that. It's not a gene for cancer. It's a failure in DNA repair, double-stranded DNA repair, right? That you get from one parent or the other. But that's what they inherited. And these are very rare. So less than 5% of the cancers have some sort of genetic failure to repair some sort of mutation that occurs. But the point is this: even if you have the BRCA gene, you're Angelina Jolie, and you're born with, you got it from one parent, but we have two sets of chromosomes. So therefore, the other one is not. So you're not a full-on BRCA.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you prevent a mutation today, which is called somatic instead of an inherited mutation? A somatic means it occurs today in your life. How does it occur? from your lifestyle. So what should you do? What should Angelina Jolie have done? Live a healthy life. Now, what if you're not BRCA and you're not Angelina Jolie? What should you do? Live a healthy life. So in other words, it doesn't change.
Because you could still develop it through
yeah.
whatever, psychology.
Right. Because we know that breast cancers, a very small percentage are BRCA. So that all the other women that are getting it were not BRCA. So you can't look at genes, and you can't, and they use that because if it's your genes, there's only one place you can go, to the guys who, the saviors are the doctors and the pharmaceutical companies. They're going to fix you.
Yeah, I wrote down, because my mom had stage 3 breast cancer 15 years ago. She's fine now, but she wrote it down because there's not a chance I'm going to remember it. So she said she had stage 3C breast cancer, 11 out of 25 nodes, and she was doing post-double MX dose-dense chemo, AC 30 rounds of radiation with a bolus, then naturopathic medicine for 2 years on Zometa infusions. Yeah, there's not a chance I was going to remember that.
Right.
So she was telling that, and that's because she said in one of our genes, we have the HNPCC, hereditary non-polycystic. And I'm supposed to go get tested for that. I think it's possibly it can lead to a type of colon cancer.
Polyposis.
Yeah, so she said, I'm supposed to test for that. So based on what we're talking about, if I have that gene, then do I need to
be extra careful?
Extra careful?
Yeah, because hereditary polyposis is one of the genetic ones that predispose. It's just what it means is that you get, you have a much, you because of a defect in a gene, you get these polyps in your colon.
Okay.
And the polyps can become carcinogen. They can become cancer just because what happens is they are they become foci of inflammation. They become inflammatory, and anything chronic inflammation, anything that's chronically inflamed for a long time becomes cancer. That's what
Cancer is a wound that didn't heal.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anything like at that chronic inflammation site, I mean, what would be the answer to following up on that? Would it just be regular checkups once a year to check for that gene to see if I have the gene, and if you do, then every year you kind of have to monitor it?
Well, no, I wouldn't even do that. I wouldn't do that. I would say, okay, I do. Or okay, I don't. Either way, I would live as healthy as possible. Because either way, you're going to do it. You need to do it. If you don't have the gene, you still need to live, because your risk of cancer is, are you American?
Canadian.
So you're still you still have about a 40,
Yeah, I mean, I grew up eating garbage.
One out of 2 chance of getting cancer. Anyway, now,
yeah,
if you don't have the gene.
I've been quite healthy for the past 10 years, but I mean, prior to that, living in Canada, I mean, you grow up on grilled cheese sandwiches with ketchup and macaroni. That was their staple.
Exactly.
And you don't know any better. Your mom serves it too.
Exactly.
Now, I'm sure there were some mothers at that time that understood it, but I'm 1985, so I'm 35, so I'm going to school in the 90s. 80% of the people were eating snack pats at lunch and white bread and processed meats. That's just what it was then.
That was food.
That was food. Yeah. And you didn't know any better.
You didn't think about it.
Didn't think about it. So, I mean, that can be concerning. But I also, you said something that all of our genes and our entire body rejuvenates every 7 years anyways.
Yeah.
So you're kind of shedding that. Is that still valid, or should you still be careful because of the shitty diet you had as a kid?
Well, here's the thing. If you remember, the way if we go back to aging, what I think aging is that the accumulation of waste. That waste is in other words, not only do our major systems of elimination, urine, kidneys, bowels, skin, lungs, not only those, but just our metabolic processes as they accumulate, because we don't cleanse. And I'll talk about cleansing in a minute. We don't cleanse, these metabolic wastes accumulate and the toxic wastes accumulate. They accumulate when they start accumulate to a certain degree in our endocrine organs, pituitary, thyroid, testes, ovaries, adrenal glands, etc. Then our hormones decline. Is when we see aging. Okay, so aging is First,
Okay.
the waste accumulation, which then is followed by hormone decline, and then you see aging.
But that's going to happen naturally anyways.
Over what, 900 years maybe?
Mm.
If you were living a life that was where you were having all of your biological needs met, we don't know what our potential is. We have no idea. But we know for sure it's a minimum of 160, 180. We know of people that have lived to 200, 236, so it's not it. It's not what it is. So in other words, we have a very successful premature aging and premature death program in Western worlds, and we've metastasized to the rest of the world.
When did we split from that? At which year? I mean, you have to go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years when this concept of living to 150 was feasible. Was there like a milestone, a pinpoint, like due to diet, to lifestyle, where that changed?
Well, there were more people that lived this way before I'd have to take you back to prehistory, and that's another podcast.
Yeah.
Prehistory, because I've studied it.
Yeah, you're talking about his story, history, who wrote the books. There's probably a whole.
I'm talking about civilizations before ours.
Oh yeah, I can go. I can go. I can have that conversation down the Graham Hancock route if you're familiar.
Right.
With him. That's all. That's
right.
I just read his newest book, America Before. It's very dry, so I had to switch to the audio.
Well, he's dry. He gets dry. Yeah.
Very dry. I
had about giants.
He talked about giants. The American history. It's more about Serpent Mound in the U.S. And basically. And it's not pseudoscience to extent. At the very end, it does get very woo-woo, and I'll explain that quick. I explained it to Wade when he was on here. But basically, the premise of the book is he's trying to explain that there were probably civilizations in North America, South America, beyond mainstream media of what we understood when we crossed the Bering Strait. They said they could have came from the Polynesians, and they could have come from boats by following, just following the land borders around, and they could have ended up in, he thinks, the Amazon jungle. And then all throughout the U.S. you find these different mounds and holy sites or burial sites that are, they could be 10,000 years old. He even puts it back as 120,000 years. He's not quite sure how to date it. But that was because in the Amazon in Brazil at that time, it was 4 or 5 centigrade less, meaning instead of now it's on average 27, 28. Back then it was like 21. So it was livable. There could have been civilizations. I mean, there's statues back there as far back as the Olmecs, and we still don't even know what that is. But they have that Polynesian African look, which makes no sense. And I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent, but trying to get as much out as quick as possible. And it even goes back to the Inca, and they said a lot of those Aztec temples, they said we didn't build, or sorry, the Aztec, we didn't build this. The Inca come in and say, the Olmecs, we didn't build this. Machu Picchu, or not Machu Picchu, but other places up in Peru. Tiwanaku, they go, we didn't build this. This is here way before us.
And you can't explain it. We have 300, 400 ton, in like a jigsaw puzzle.
Correct. So
vertical.
That's kind of his premise of the book. Again, very dry. It's a 16-hour audio.
That's the problem. He's dry.
He's very dry.
He's dry. But
I'll just wrap it up. At the very, very end, I think it's his last book, to be honest. I think he was going out, so he kind of dropped the bomb. And he basically says, we don't know where this came from. Yes, there were civilizations. We don't know what they are. Again, it could be 120,000 years ago. It could be 20,000. It's very difficult to date. But his point is, he says, these structures that we don't understand how they moved, and his conclusion, and he does it in the last 5 minutes of the book. He says, it's not telekinesis, it's I'm missing the word, I'm making a mistake there, but he's basically saying the only way this worked is human minds had to move heavy blocks around by the mind.
Telekinesis, yeah.
It's a different word, because telekinesis is reading the mind. There's a different word to
telepathy is. Telekinesis. Kinesis is
correct.
moving.
Okay, it is telekinesis.
Yeah. Kinesis.
And that's his conclusion at the end of the book. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, because it's too hard for my mind to even understand. So that was I guess we went way down a different rabbit hole there on because you didn't want to get into the depth of human civilization because it's another podcast.
Or
So
pre.
but yeah.
But there were different civilizations, and in fact, we should do that too, because it's not unknown. It's just it's very little known. But there was.
When do you think we originated from? As when do you think? Okay, so modern day history says Egypt. That's 5,000 BC, and I'm talking about in the history books in school. But obviously, there's more information behind. Or I mean, Babylonian, Assyrian, Babylonian, I believe. But we can go back a step further, where they talk about like
Sumerians. We go to Sumer.
Okay, sorry, Sumerians. But then if you leave that and go to pseudoscience, essentially, you go back to 12,000 BC, and they talk about like Göbekli Tepe. And there's a very interesting pyramid in Indonesia outside of Jakarta. Graham Hancock goes there with Robert Schoch. Yeah. They only touch on it a little bit, but they date that thing back 20,000 years, which not through carbon dating, just from digging. It's this deep. Mm-hmm. This is the only way this can exist. Mm-hmm. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there was a guy in England in the 1880s, and he was trained. He was a British guy, and he was trained. He went to India, and he was working with these villages. And in India, they have people called rishis. And rishis are...
Rishi or Reiki master?
Rishi. R-I-S-H-I.
Okay.
And they are kind of like the elders, and they carry the traditions. And anyway, there was this one group where they practiced a language. They had this language that they had rituals where they would speak this language and they would read certain things. And he wound up staying there for like 10, 15 years. And he became friends. He said, "Well, why are you doing this?" He goes, because there's these books so that we don't forget how to read these books. And he goes, "Well, why don't you read one?" "Well, no, that's not our job. Our job is just know how to read it." He goes, "Well, let's read one." Anyway, he learned it with them. They wound up reading these books, which they were ancient books.
Now, are they rewriting them through time because of, the material could degrade? They have to keep, or is it the original book?
I think it was the original book. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Anyway, it talked about the land of Mu. And Mu comes from Lemuria, the land of Lemuria. And the civilization, as far as he could tell from the writings, went back probably around at least 800,000 years. Mm. And he studied this one book that they allowed him to read over and over again. When he left, he went down to New Zealand, the Maori, and he went up and he spent his whole life. And he found out that he found the similarities along the west coast of South America and all of the islands up to Japan, why it's called the land of the rising sun. All of the things he found out, that all of that and all of Asia are the descendants of Mu, the descendants of this civilization, this great civilization. And there's this one island that is a mind-boggling island to let you know exactly. It's called, can't remember the name of it.
Where is it located?
It's in the Pacific. It's about 100 miles.
Like Easter Island?
No. It's like 100 kilometers off the coast of Luzon, Philippines. It's a man-made island made out of spun basalt, and which is iron, which is magnetic. And what they did was...
And this still exists today.
Yeah.
You could visit this.
Yeah, it's called...
So it's between the Philippines and Taiwan.
Yeah. I'm not sure if Taiwan, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Taiwan's a bit just north of like the northern tip of Philippines.
Right, and I don't know where it's out. Yeah.
Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Which way it's out. But anyway, it's a man-made island. Now, just to give you an idea of the understanding of their knowledge. So whereas with our knowledge, we build machines that are destructive and have waste and produce waste. So what their knowledge was, they understood that weather was electromagnetic in nature. They understood that. This spun basalt. So normally, if you hold the compass over a basalt, it'll have it'll give you north, south on the earth. When you hold it over this island, it goes because it's spun. In addition, they built it with, there's a pools of these eels, electronic eels, that have electricity.
The eels are on the island, kind of,
in this large area.
Captivated.
Well, no, they come in through the, underneath there's like
Yep.
ways for them to come in, right? And they come in and they mate there and they do things. So there's a lot of them there. They kind of congregate there. However they attracted them there, they did, but they spun this stuff like this. So every year when the hurricanes and whatever it was would hit the Philippines and wipe out everything, when the hurricanes or whatever they are came over this island, it diffused it. And there was like 100 kilometers, maybe 300 kilometers, I don't know, part of the island that didn't get storms. And it was called the rice basket, the rice bowl of Asia. It fed all of Asia. It was one part of Asia that didn't get the storms. Now, this is not a naturally occurring. In other words, so this is how the mentality of that civilization manipulated nature by using natural phenomenon instead of what we do.
How big's this island approximately?
I'm not sure. It's called
But I mean, it still exists.
Nan Madol.
People could look this up. They could technically visit it if they wanted.
Right.
Or is it kind of off limits from like the government?
I'm not even sure nowadays. Yeah. But if you want to read about it and read this whole story, so that you see the continuity in the Maori up to the Japanese, and everyone in between, which is what you were talking about. And it's Lemuria. It's the land of Mu.
Do you think it was like almost like not a peninsula, but a strait?
Yeah.
A giant strait.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the other culture, and I mean Plato, who wasn't a dummy.
He went back and he talks about Atlantis.
As being real, not as speculation.
But he's saying that like it could be 7,000 years before his time.
Right.
Very old.
Right. It's another civilization.
Yeah.
And that one is the one that went and became Europe, and the Lemurians became this. But anyway, when we're talking about these people, the way I could get it is that probably Lemuria was probably anywhere from 1 million to 800,000 years, and it probably ended around 40,000 years ago, and Atlantis kind of picked up, and then Atlantis kind of ended, and apparently, there is a record of, and I forget what it is, 1186 BC, there was the record of a meteor, and I think Graham Hancock even talks about that in Fingerprints. But that ended Atlantis. That was it. But anyway, that seeded it, and they became Sumeria, which Sumeria became. In fact, when you go back, there's all the stories that we have in our Bibles are ancient Sumerian stories that existed before. They had a flood. They had a Noah. They had.
That's what they say. The flood was probably. That's Graham Hancock goes back behind that. There's stories of the flood everywhere in the world. It probably happened 12,000 BC, and that's science. I mean, the ice caps melted. This is what happened. And it's the only thing that even makes sense on a lot of these places where you have megalithic structures, like up in.
Well, that other book he had, the underground. Off the ocean, right? Remember?
Oh, that's the one where he's scuba diving in Japan.
Yeah.
But it's basically saying like the most interesting part of it all is when he goes up to the megalithic structures up in Bolivia or Peru, or even Ecuador. Anyways, way up in the mountains, and those megalithic structures are destroyed. meaning the water levels would have had to come so high, thousands of feet, and it would have just wiped everything.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the premise behind it. There's a little bit of pseudoscience, but there is also data and facts being like 100% the ice caps melted. They know could be from either meteors or from the sun. That's what Robert Schoch thinks. He thinks probably between, I think, 12,000 years ago, so like 10,000 BC till about 5,000 BC, there could have been sun lightning storms for thousands of years, where the sun was just shooting off electricity, which would have caused people possibly to go underground. And Dr. Robert Schoch, of all people, he's not into the pseudoscience. He's telling you, like, well, this is the only way this stuff could actually happen. So,
well, anyway, and they dated, I think they dated the Sphinx as being at least 12,000.
Yeah, they even date it back to 26.
Yeah.
Because of the lion structure that it aligns with the stars of Leo, which only existed 26,000 years ago. And they also maybe you know what, a lot of Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock, a lot of people have listened to that, so this is not new for anyone listening. But that's exactly what in America. The New America, or the Undiscovered America, Graham Hancock's new book, he does discuss that, saying that, well, you need to understand, if Brazil 12,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago in the rainforest was 21 centigrade, you also have to understand that in the Serengeti was a forest, a rainforest. The planet was completely different back then.
Right. Well, but remember the ridges on the back end of the Sphinx.
Yeah, it's from water erosion.
Right. It was from torrential rain.
Yeah.
Torrential rain. And the last time there was torrential rain there was 12,000
years
ago.
And that's what they showed all the geologists.
Right.
And they said they didn't show the Sphinx. They showed the rock side.
Yeah,
they said, what is this? What do you think happened?
Yeah.
Every single one says it's from rain.
Right.
And then they show it's the
Torrential,
Sphinx.
yeah.
The question that always bothers me is, like, why? What is the agenda? What is the motivation behind mainstream media, science, geology, archaeology, to deny these facts? Because they do.
Control. And if you look at, it's very telling that every time there was a conquer, somebody conquered, they would burn their libraries. The libraries at Alexandria were burned, and now supposedly there's a library underneath the Sphinx.
Yeah, I've heard
right?
that. And the Vatican and
right. So who knows? We don't have access to what they do, and why? Because knowledge is power. So to have control of the knowledge and the truth keeps us enslaved. And what was the Dark Ages? Nobody knew how. You know what took us out of the Dark Ages?
The plague?
A guy named Gutenberg.
Okay.
He invented the printing press.
Ah.
Then the started to make books. The first book they made was the Bible. And that got the Renaissance. It's knowledge.
Because you're spreading information at a rapid rate.
Well, prior to that, only the clergy and the royalty would read. Nobody else could read. It was an illiterate world. And remember this, when we're talking about the world, we're talking about Europe. Asians are different. Chinese were highly literate and doing all sorts of stuff. So we're talking about a European, where our people come from. The Europeans were the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages were they were all illiterate.
To control, essentially.
Knowledge. So they took it away. So we had no knowledge. Then knowledge, once books started becoming, then we got the Renaissance and everything.
Yeah. Okay, I think I don't know any other better segue for this, but going back into your expertise in oncology, I listened to and anyone watching this, we discussed before the podcast. We're sorry, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of the current situation. We both want to stay in Thailand, so that's it. So we're not going to go down that hole, but we'll try to go down a different hole that is conspiracy theory, a bit of pseudoscience, but at least we have an educated physician to give a background. It's not me and Talise throwing information back and forth that's complete nonsense based on what we watched on YouTube or read. So I want to jump into the science behind this. Understanding how Wi-Fi, electromagnetic frequencies affect our body, and how does that correlate to illness?
You know, if it's first instructive to understand that everything in the universe is frequencies, right? So,
let's fix this.
So, for example, if you look at the periodic table of elements, you have hydrogen, then you have helium, then you have lithium, and it goes on and on and on. You know, oxygen is number 8, and it goes like that. All that's happening with each element is that there's one more proton, one more electron, one more neutron. So they're just adding those. But the way they relate to each other, the electrons flying around the neutron and the proton, results in a certain frequency. And those frequencies are like fingerprints. So that's why an astronomer can look up at a distant star millions of light years away, look at its the wavelengths, and be able to tell you it's made 70% of this, 30% of helium, 20% hydrogen, because that's what these are the frequencies. So everything is frequencies. Light is frequency, sound is frequency. Our atoms are frequencies, and we're made up of all that. So therefore, if you understand that that's what physical reality is it's frequencies, then you understand that how by adding frequencies you can either augment or the opposite, diminish.
Incoherent frequencies. I think this is the term you were saying. Yeah. Incoherent, where it's like our frequencies, they're not aligning, so it's almost like they're becoming disturbed.
Yeah.
So if our bodies are running on a certain frequency, I'm not sure what that number is in terms of, you can measure that in like kilohertz, gigahertz, or megahertz, or it goes up and up, even up towards your gamma rays and X-rays. I'm not sure what we're running on, but if the frequency from, let's say, your Wi-Fi or your 4G or 5G or cell phone is at a different frequency, it will be incoherent, and this is going to cause disturbance within our system and can lead to illness.
Well, yeah. There's actually some specific things. What we do know that Wi-Fi does is we know that the frequencies of 4G and Wi-Fi, what they do is they actually paralyze what are called the voltage-gated calcium channels. And voltage, and what the reason that's important is because all cells have sodium channels, potassium channels, calcium channels, things like that are important for the functioning. Well, calcium is extremely important. So they're voltage gated, meaning that the gate, they open and close, depending on voltage. But these are paralyzed with 4G and Wi-Fi. And once they're paralyzed, then calcium flies into the cell at a rate of 1 million molecules per second. When calcium enters into a cell and it runs into what is it that it runs into?
Like the actual like molecular structure,
right? It runs into what is it run into? I can't remember the chemical it runs into, but when it runs into it, it starts to the reaction is that it produces what are called peroxynitrates and hydroxyl radicals, and those actually destroy the cell. So,
and what is the side effect? What can that lead to in terms of illness? Does it lead to cancers? Can it lead to other types of diseases?
Well, you guys, where do we have the most calcium channels? We actually have most of them on our heart, our nerves, right? So this can lead to, so what we're seeing is nerve damage, heart damage, right? Cardiac arrhythmias and things like that, heart attacks, cardiac arrhythmias, fibrillation. But nerve damage and brain damage. So we've seen like about a 1,200% increase in brain tumors and neurological problems, and also it affects your thinking, your ability to think. Now, the reason that they know this is true, 100% sure that that's exactly the mechanism, is that there is a drug. There's a class of drugs we use for high blood pressure called calcium channel blockers. Okay, because if you can block the channel, if you can block the calcium from entering, then because the calcium goes into the cell and makes it contract. So if you can block that,
similar to like statins, or
that's a different kind of drug.
Completely different.
So the calcium channel blockers will block it and make the cells. So in other words, your cells aren't working that hard, so the pressure comes down. Okay, so they're called calcium channel blockers. So what they did was they took animals and they exposed them to lethal doses of EMF,
of electromagnetic frequency.
And gave half of them calcium channel blockers and the other half not. Ones with the calcium channel blockers had no effect. The other ones died. And they've done this multiple times. So we know that to be true. So now, our body and the buildup of hydroxyl radical, which I talked about earlier with metabolic byproducts that build up, waste that builds up during the day, is so important to neutralize that in our gut we produce about 10 liters a day of molecular hydrogen. And molecular hydrogen is hydrogen gas, H2. Okay? Now when H2 enters the cell, and you understand hydrogen is the smallest atom, the smallest known thing in the universe. Okay? The hydrogen ion, atom. But when the two atoms come together, you have H2, so it's therefore the smallest molecule in the universe. And so it doesn't need channels or anything. It can pass in and out of all cells. So we produce this, and some of it comes out, as we all know, but a lot of it, most of it goes into the cell. Now, when hydrogen runs into a hydroxyl radical, which is OH negative, and it is the most damaging of, it's the one that causes all the problems we have, including aging and everything. Hydrogen hits an OH, it turns it into H2O water. So it's a specific antioxidant. Instead of a generalized antioxidant, it's a specific antioxidant. It enters cells. So that's not enough, though. That 10 liters of molecular hydrogen was enough when we were living a natural life, a healthy life and going to bed. Now that we're living in this and we're exposed to even more, and now we're having our calcium channels blocked and all that. So anyway, that's one. If anyone's interested in how can I mitigate the
what could we do to protect ourselves from even like your Wi-Fi, but beyond just switching to Ethernet, because I mean sometimes if you're in a large hotel, I mean I read some stuff you were saying about copper blankets and being able to block from the radiation or the Wi-Fi signal entering the room, but people in busy lives, you go to restaurants, you go to cafes, whatever. You can't get away. So what? And you go outside now with 4G towers and 5G towers, and again, this isn't this 5G conspiracy bullshit. We're trying to find some actual evidence from science behind it all. So what can people do to mitigate that risk?
Well, actually, you can get molecular hydrogen and make it. You can get little kind of machine where you put it makes it out of water, and you can do this. Or you can order online these tablets where you take a glass bottle of water, drinkable water, potable water. You drop it in, close it, and it'll bubble. It'll start to bubble. When it's all fizzed out, then you drink it right away because it'll go away. And if you can drink enough of this throughout the day, this will neutralize specifically the effects from 4G. Okay, not 5G, but 4G.
It's an inhibitor from like this calcium.
The calcium-induced hydroxyl radical, which is at the end peroxynitrates and then hydroxyl OH negative. No, it goes the molecular hydrogen goes into the cell. And when it mixes with, when H2 hits OH negative, you wind up with two H2Os.
Okay.
Water. It's nature's way of neutralizing something. There's no garbage, there's no waste, there's no secondary metabolite. It just becomes water. So in other words, it's the cleanest way. There's nothing else. So molecular hydrogen probably is the most specific way of doing it. Other than that, you just want to decrease your exposure if you can. Like you were saying, you can get Faraday blankets, Faraday cage. You got I have Faraday gloves where
what is Faraday?
Faraday just is.
It's like an infused copper material. Or?
It's copper or any kind of conductive material that if it's in parallel enough of it,
It's
where it's conducting,
absorbing it
it
almost.
blocks it when the EMF hits it, it can't pass.
So, but before we started this part, I listened to your what you thought of it, and I had the same opinion as well. But I think it's fair as well that we need to play devil's advocate, and I've done the research and trying to understand. Okay, what is the flip side of the story? And a lot of people will come out and say, no, 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi, it does not lead to any illnesses. This is all bullshit. You can go online and watch some YouTube videos on that. And I was explaining before we went to air that I've done that research. And there's an article or a YouTube video, but it's sponsored by The Guardian News. And basically what they say is there is a protocol or committee in charge called, and I wrote this down, the ICN-IRP, which stands for the International Committee for Non-Iodized something. Okay. Now, what this committee is saying is they dictate what is acceptable in EMF, and people, I think, let them do their own research on the EMF scale, would we call it, essentially from like low-level frequencies all the way up to X-rays, gamma rays, which they are quite dangerous for us. But they've dictated this scale. And they say, well, Wi-Fi, it doesn't fall on this scale that can harm you. But it's still around like, I believe like 60, I want to say 60 kilohertz or 60 megahertz. It is still quite high, and it's getting very close to X-ray gamma ray. The point of this is that they're saying that, well, no, it's not on the scale. Well, yeah, they dictate the scale of what's safe. So they've set the standard. And then as you get into that, it goes even a step deeper. There's a company, I believe The Guardian is the UK, and it says, well, no, there's a study done by Ofcom. And Ofcom is the managing for all telecom companies, like the program or protocol or whatever for all companies in the UK. Well, that's where it threw it off to me because, well, of course they're going to say that. And of course they're going to set the standard. And to make this, it's a bit long-winded, but back to the point is, what is acceptable for us on this EMF scale to live by? Because do we not absorb radiation from the sun, or is that complete cockamamie?
No.
And also, do we not absorb a lot of radiation when we fly?
Yeah. Well, when you get above 30,000 feet, that's when you need to be making liquid molecular hydrogen.
And do you do this for yourself when flying?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can get the pill and drop it in, drink it. I don't fly anymore. I used to fly a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, above 30,000 feet, then you really need it. Plus vitamin C. Vitamin C is very important for neutralizing. You understand, vitamin C is what they call a reducing agent or an antioxidant. It donates electrons, so it quenches free radicals. Where the molecular hydrogen goes intracellularly and quenches the free radicals inside. The vitamin C will get it in your blood, outside, and then the molecular hydrogen will get inside the cell and quench it. The truth is, what is the safe range? We've exceeded that. We live in an unsafe. It's like at this point, nothing.
You can't even walk the streets.
Right. You can't get away from it. So now it's completely defensive mode. You've got to be taking vitamin C. You've got to be taking vitamin E and vitamin A. These are the big ones. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you get the vitamin A, get the mixed carotenoids. And when you get the vitamin E, get the mixed tocopherols, because vitamin E's are called tocopherols. And you get the mixed ones, the alpha, beta, gamma. The same with the carotenoids and vitamin C. So if you got all of those, then you're getting...
and this is just prevention medicine.
Right.
And you were also saying, I was reading, you're saying zinc, vitamin D, and I want to say flavonoids?
Right, flavonoids.
Flavonoids.
Right. So, zinc and vitamin D are just very important, but also selenium, I would say. Selenium. So what I take is manganese, which is a mineral.
Yes.
Manganese, magnesium, selenium, boron, I said magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D.
And not a mixed vitamin. You're taking all different pills.
We're all different ones.
They're
Yeah.
all like concentrated.
Concentrated, right? And only because I live in such an artificial world. But and if I was in a natural setting, then I get all that I need from the food, right?
Yeah.
But in our setting, we just don't. We can't get enough.
And that's just to protect ourselves. And I was reading on one of your I guess I will call it a protocol about the current situation from a year ago. Actually, this is a really good video. Again, we can't talk about it. Go check out Dr. Thomas Lodi's YouTube account. There's a video from about a year ago on the current situation. It's an hour and a half. There's a lot of information on the preventative medicine you should be taking, also what to do for your lifestyle, and a whole background story of the current situation. Go check that out. I watched the whole thing earlier today to kind of prep myself for this interview, but he made a good point as to why we should not talk about it. So we're not going to. But back to I was reading about that protocol. You were saying, what was it? Like 8 to 15 grams of vitamin C a day. You're taking this much.
Yeah.
So if I'm not mistaken, I take vitamin C. So I take vitamin C, magnesium, zinc, vitamin B complex. I take lion's mane. I take a different type of nootropic. I'll show you later. I take zinc. Maybe I mentioned that, reishi and some other mushroom stuff, supplements, and pine pollen. I don't know. I feel like I get a testosterone boost, which I don't think it's actually that's what it's doing. Anyways, the point is the vitamin C. I'm taking one pill a day. And one pill is 1,000 milligram. You're that's correct, right?
Yeah.
You're taking 8 to 15 pills of vitamin C per day.
Gram. Yeah. You're taking what? You're taking
1 gram.
1 gram. Yeah.
So 1 pill is a gram, right? So are you taking it by IV?
No, orally.
So you're taking 8 to 15 pills of vitamin C per day.
Yeah, and you take it throughout the day.
Throughout the day.
Otherwise, you'll get diarrhea.
Yeah, there's a certain there a certain threshold, like at which point your body cannot absorb any more vitamin C? That's I've read online that the body cannot absorb more than 2,000 milligrams or 2 grams.
Well, no, it's
per day.
in time, but so the best way to do it, the easiest way to do it, is to get a pure vitamin C powder.
Okay.
Pure.
Where could they get that in living in Thailand?
You have to go online. I'm not sure if Ayaherb has it. I order it myself through the U.S., but yeah, I've got many bottles, but they'll run out eventually.
So it's like a powder you're putting into your water?
So what you do is you take out about 10 grams.
Okay.
And put it into like a liter of water.
Okay.
And just sip on it slowly throughout the day. So whatever else, you need to be drinking other things and eating whatever you're doing, but throughout the day, so that because then you'll absorb it all, right? And so you start in the morning, and you make a deal with yourself not to finish it until like 6 p.m., right? And then so from morning till 6 p.m. you drink it, you will have absorbed it all, and that's the amount of vitamin C. Or it's only a vitamin to primates and guinea pigs and fruit bats, certain unique distinct species, because all other organisms, plants, animals, all make ascorbates, which are vitamin C. So your dog does, your cat does, elephants do, bears do, crocodiles do, lizards do, snakes do. They all make it. So it's not a vitamin. They don't need to ingest it. But nature is very economical. So those organisms in which that was part of what their diet, it already existed. They didn't need the mechanism. So we're actually just missing one enzyme in the pathway. And very interesting, ascorbates, which is vitamin C, ascorbates are made from sugar. They're actually made from glucose in plants, in animals, in animals make it from glucose, and plants make it from mannose, from a different one. But anyway, we're missing that last one enzyme. We just don't have it, so we can't make it, right?
I assume we've never been able to make this.
Never. Because it's part of our diet. So nature's economical. So for another organism, like a dog, who's getting something in their diet, their body won't have to make it, whereas we would be making it because it's not part. In other words, nature thought of everything, right? So you don't have to.
So how are we getting it? Because obviously we couldn't get it synthetically 1,000 years ago. How did we get the recommended daily dose of vitamin C back then?
Right. Well, eating a natural human diet, you'd be eating large amounts of plant food, right? So if we look at our simian cousins in the jungle, like the chimps and the gorillas, they eat 10 to 20 times more fresh vegetables and fruits than us. And also understand, too, that the difference between the fruit when I was growing up and today in terms of what it has nutrient-wise is tremendous. I mean, when I was growing up in the late 50s and early 60s, the food was, it tasted completely different than it does now. And imagine, that was completely depleted from the 2 generations before, right? And when they first started talking about the soil mineral depletion in the soil, which affects the nutrients of the plant, they were first talking about it being at dangerous levels in a report that came out in the 1920s. So imagine where we are now. This was pre-pesticides.
Yeah.
So imagine where we are. So the amount that we're getting in our current vegetables and plants is just simply not enough. We'd have to be literally eating all day. So one reason that one should make themselves fresh vegetable juices, not fruit juices because you don't want to concentrate the sugar, but fresh vegetable juices like celery, cucumber, kale,
Carrot.
spinach, and things like that, is because you're getting, when you're removing the fiber, you're getting just the nutrients. So 1 liter of a fresh vegetable juice is an armful of vegetables. You could never eat that much. But you're getting all the phytonutrients, minerals, and all that sort of thing. So if it's organic, this is the only way. So by drinking lots of green juices and also oranges and fruits and eating that all day long, you would probably get enough, because considering the fact that even our organic vegetables don't have the nutrients that they used to have.
Is that because there's issues with the soil and tilling that have led to deficiencies in B12 and vitamin B?
Well, deficiencies in minerals and microorganisms. So the minerals and the microorganisms are what contribute to the quality of the plant material, right?
And because of our deficiency in these vitamins, minerals, and whatnot, this is why our body is not optimized and able to protect itself against these diseases, or not diseases, these let's say EMFs coming into our health and causing serious health issues.
Right.
But prior to let's say prior to the invention of the telephone, because that's something that we discussed, and maybe we can touch on quickly. We discussed this before the podcast. I think there's an interesting correlation between the release of 5G and certain diseases, and the release of 4G and certain diseases, and 3G and Wi-Fi and so on. And again, this is not this pseudo woo-woo science. You can actually go do the research yourself and look at when 4G came out, what came out. Wow.
Yeah.
SARS. Okay. Other things like this. And it goes all the way back. And we discussed that when was electricity fully used and the telephone. Fully used by over 40% of Americans in 1918. 2 years later, Spanish flu. And I heard that, again, I've explained this, I think, on this podcast before, from a reputable nuclear refrigeration physicist up in Chiang Mai, that's from the UK, that used to work for the UK Navy. He used to work on submarines off of Argentina. So the guy, it's not some kook that's making stuff up. All they did was point to the evidence and the facts. And that's, what are your thoughts on that? As we release new technology into the world, how can it affect us in ways that are leading to these illnesses?
Yeah.
Well, we got two pronged problem. Two really together it's like a formula for destruction and death, and species ending stuff. And that is, our nutrients have been so depleted that we don't have the ability we don't have the physiology, the biochemistry, and the immunity to protect ourselves the way we would have
even 200,
back 200 years ago.
200 years ago, yeah.
Before any of this stuff. But now we have all this excess stuff that we're exposed to that is that would require much greater amounts. So we're at this point, we have to take mega vitamins, doses. Minerals are a big deal, and we can talk about minerals, but that's a very big deal. Remember, the vitamins are made by the plants. Plants can do that if they have the minerals, right? And so minerals are, so when we think of micronutrients, we think of minerals and vitamins, okay? They all come through plants. When we think of the macronutrients, which are carbs, proteins, and fats, they all originate in plants. All fats originate in seeds and nuts. All carbohydrates originate from plants. And all proteins, amino acids, are made initially. All the essential amino acids are made by plants. Animals eat them and then can make their own additional proteins, additional amino acids. But anyway, so the only thing we can do now is to maximize our health, get the sleep, get the movement, exercise. And when we talk about movement, when I talk about movement, it's not to sit around for 6 hours and then to go into a gym for 2 hours and engage in crazy activity. That's just as unnatural as sitting for 6 hours. If we were several hundred years ago living a natural life, from morning till night, we'd be moving and bending and picking things up and all that. We wouldn't be running and
we'd kind of be similar to the Amish,
right? Be moving around all day,
working on the farm, trying to be self-sustainable.
And when you look at the long-lived people, the Abkhazias, the Hunzas, they're moving, walking around all day. It's movement. It's not. You don't have to freak out in a gym for an hour, right? That's not going to bring you health. And then sit around for 8 hours.
The gym is not natural movement.
Right.
Now, if you're surfing or playing sports, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But the gym is it's
for a purpose of
we've never done that in our entire civilization.
Yeah.
And that to that level.
Right. To get healthy, right. To get healthy is different. Surfing is probably one of the greatest ever, Yeah. And surfing also teaches you something that's very, very important that humans don't do. And that is, it teaches you how to listen. And you're listening with your body.
It's, for me, what surfing does, it's one of the only things that I can do that allows me to be present.
Exactly.
You have when you're on the ocean, the ape mind cannot even chat. You know why? You got a 5-foot wave coming at your head that if you're not talking to the wave and being present in the moment, you're going to get smashed.
Exactly.
So that's why I enjoy surfing. It's my form of meditation.
Exactly. It is meditation. It is. But it's 100% listening with your body, right? You can't tell the wave which way. You got to be feeling it. If the wave's going this way, you're going that way. Yeah. You don't. In other words, and so that's what I talk about life too. When I talk to the people I work with, my patients, we have to learn how to surf life, right? If it's coming up this way, you go with it. You go with it. And don't resist it and all that. And when I see people that don't survive cancer, it's because they're resisting it. They're not surfing.
But it's very difficult as well. Like, let's say I'm working on the computer and whatnot. The problem in those moments, there's too many distractions. Things enter the mind. Okay, you're working. Oh, I'll go make something to eat. I'll go to the bathroom. Do I really have to go to the bathroom? Or do I just not want to do this task?
Right.
Oh, I'm going to get a coffee. I'm going to get a water.
Yeah.
But that's my point back to surfing. You have no other options. You're stuck there.
It's perfect.
But not life naturally today, it's much different than probably it was 200 years ago. If you're on the farm and you're farming, well, you got 12 hours and the sun goes down. I have to get this done. Or, if I don't get this, from this animal or this plant, I don't eat tonight. So you have to be present. I find today we lack the experience of being bored. We can, for myself, and it's terrible, we will never be bored again. We will never. If I were to have kids, that generation will never be bored, and he will never know the feeling of sitting in a dentist office and waiting 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Never. Why? You just go to the phone, distract yourself for 45 minutes. When I was a kid, you go to the dentist's office and you'd pick up you'd start playing with the children's toys. You're so bored, right? To stay distracted. So I don't know how that's going to influence in the long run, but I don't know if it's a good thing either.
Well, no, it's not. But the biggest loss that the video games and phones and all that do, is that they destroy imagination. Okay, and if you remember, Einstein said imagination is more important it's the most important part of human intelligence. And that is because when you're playing a video game, all the answers exist, all the possibilities exist. You're not creative. You need to just find the rules and follow them and beat them, right? Be the best at their game, okay? When I was a kid, there was nothing like that. Okay, you be this guy. I'll be this guy. Yeah. Okay, this is our gun.
Stick. Yeah.
And then, you had to
create
make things up
your
and
environment.
Extrapolate. Yeah. You made it, and then your imagination was like that. Now you don't. Now, with you're sitting there, you got to, okay, what are the rules? What are the rules? Okay, it's all deductive. Yeah. There's no inductive reasoning. It's all deductive. And so you might become a good fighter pilot or something like that, but you're not going to be creative. You're not going to come up with, So the people that do make that, the people that do are the musicians, in our world. The musicians and the artists, because they are outside of that. They and usually they're usually, like, not always, but they're usually not that into all the stuff that like
technology.
And they're not good at school. Yeah. So my son told me, like 15, I don't want to go to school. He didn't like it, and he didn't need it. He's doing great. He's an amazing musician, singer, songwriter, living in Japan, and and for him, music is his meditation. And what is music? Music is now,
and it's also vibration, frequency as well. With music, right.
But it's like you said, you're present.
You have present. To be in the moment. Yeah,
you're in the moment. Yeah, the goal of a song is not to get to the last chord, right? It's just like dancing. You don't dance to wind up at a specific spot on the floor. The dance is the dance. The dance is the reason to dance.
Yeah, that's very. I can go into that for a little bit, but I know I think we.
I got to run.
Yeah, he's got to run. He's a little strapped on time, but I'll finish on that point. Your process on understanding music and dance, and there's no end goal. I think end goal, it's a very masculine mentality that's been created by the earth, but the earth, when you think about it, we call it Mother Earth. It's expanding, it's growing. The universe is expanding and growing. And as we know it, there is no beginning and there's no end from the science we have. But for some reason, the masculine mentality on human earth, we need an end goal. Who won the game? What's the score?
Yeah.
Did you read the end of the book?
Yeah.
When does this podcast end?
Exactly.
We need closure. But I think when you're riding the wave of life, and again, music, whatever you're applying it to on the art side, stop thinking about closure. Stop thinking about the end. Enjoy the journey.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, on that note, there's so much we missed. We'll try to get back to it, but we've probably been doing this 3 hours.
Yeah.
So this is your camera here. Again, thanks for coming on, but everything that you want to plug, how people can find you, if you're looking for people to find you, your YouTube channel, your Instagram, and if you're not even sure what that is, we can plug it as well here, like in a type of
I'm not sure, but I know Instagram and Facebook, I think, at Dr. Thomas Lodi, I think.
You can pretty much, everyone can find you online by just typing in Dr. Thomas Lodi, right. LinkedIn, Instagram. Do you remember YouTube. Your Instagram handle or no? I'll double check.
At Dr. Thomas Lodi.
Thomas Lodi. It is Dr. Thomas Lodi on Instagram. It's amazing content, so you can check that out. And also on YouTube, it is just Dr. Thomas Lodi. Tons of information, a lot of stuff on there that we couldn't talk about on there, so check that out. Again, thanks for joining us today. We are Fruiting Body Mushrooms. We are a medicinal mushroom supplement company, all natural product. We'll talk about that a little more because we're running quick on time. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, do all that fun stuff. And thanks for watching.